princess, Helena the Fair. We say that we are wise folks, but our old people dispute the fact, saying, "No, no, we were wiser than you are." But Skazkas tell that, before our grandfathers had learnt anything, before their grandfathers were born, there lived in a certain land an old man of this kind who instructed his 3 sons in reading and writing and all book learning. Then said he to them, "Now, my children, when I die, mind you come and read prayers over my grave." "Very good, father, very good," they replied. The 2 elder brothers were such fine strapping fellows, so tall and stout. But as for the youngest one, Ivan, he was like a half-grown lad or a half-fledged duckling, terribly inferior to the others. Well, their old father died. At that very time there came tidings from the king that his daughter, the Princess Helena the Fair, had ordered a shrine to be built for her with 12 columns, with 12 rows of beams. In that shrine she was sitting upon a high throne and awaiting her bridegroom, the bold youth, who, with a single bound of his swift steed, should reach high enough to kiss her on the lips. A stir ran through the whole youth of the nation. They took to licking their lips and scratching their heads, and wondering to whose share so great an honour would fall. "Brothers," said Vanyusha, "our father is dead. Which of us is to read prayers over his grave?" "Whoever feels inclined, let him go," answered the brothers. So Vanya went, but as for his elder brothers, they did nothing but exercise their horses, and curl their hair, and dye their moustaches. The second night came. "Brothers," said Vanya, "I've done my share of reading. It's your turn now. Which of you will go?" "Whoever likes can go and read. We've business to look after. Don't you meddle." And they cocked their caps, and shouted, and whooped, and flew this way, and shot that way, and roved about the open country. So Vanyusha read prayers this time also, and on the third night too. Well, his brothers got ready their horses, combed out their moustaches, and prepared to go next morning to test their mettle before the eyes of Helena the Fair. "Shall we take the youngster?" they thought. "No, no. What would be the good of him? He'd make folks laugh and put us to confusion. Let's go by ourselves." So away they went, but Vanyusha wanted very much to have a look at the Princess Helena the Fair. He cried bitterly, and went out to his father's grave, and his father heard him in his coffin, and came out to him, shook the damp earth off his body, and said, "Don't grieve, Vanya. I'll help you in your trouble." And immediately the old man drew himself up, and straightened himself, and called aloud and whistled with a ringing voice, with a shrill whistle. From goodness knows whence appeared a horse, the earth quaking beneath it, a flame rushing from its ears and nostrils. To and fro it flew, and then stood still before the old man, as if rooted in the ground, and cried, "What are thy commands?" Vanya crept into one of the horse's ears, and out of the other, and turned into such a hero as no skazka can tell of, no pen describe. He mounted the horse, set his arms akimbo, and flew, just like a falcon, straight to the home of the Princess Helena. With a wave of his hand, with a bound aloft, he only failed by the breadth of 2 rows of beams. Back again he turned, galloped up, leapt aloft, and got within 1 beam row's breadth. Once more he turned, once more he wheeled, then shot past the eye like a streak of fire, took an accurate aim, and kissed the fair Helena right on the lips. "Who is he? Who is he? Stop him! Stop him!" was the cry. Not a trace of him was to be found. Away he galloped to his father's grave, let the horse go free, prostrated himself on the earth, and besought his father's counsel. And the old man held counsel with him. When he got home, he behaved as if he hadn't been anywhere. His brothers talked away, describing where they had been, what they had seen, and he listened to them as of old. The next day there was a gathering again. In the princely halls there were more boyars and nobles than a single glance could take in. The elder brothers rode there. Their younger brother went there too, but on foot, meekly and modestly, just as if he hadn't kissed the princess, and seated himself in a distant corner. The Princess Helena asked for her bridegroom, wanted to show him to the world at large, wanted to give him half her kingdom, but the bridegroom did not put in an appearance. Search was made for him among the boyars, among the generals. Everyone was examined in his turn, but with no result. Meanwhile, Vanya looked on, smiling and chuckling, and waiting till the bride should come to him herself. "I pleased her then," says he, "when I appeared as a gay gallant. Now let her fall in love with me in my plain caftan." Then up she rose, looked around with bright eyes that shed a radiance on all who stood there, and saw and knew her bridegroom, and made him take his seat by her side, and speedily was wedded to him. And he, good heavens, how clever he turned out, and how brave, and what a handsome fellow! Only see him mount his flying steed, give his cap a cock, and stick his elbows akimbo. Why, you'd say he was a king, a born king. You'd never suspect he once was only Vanyusha. The incident of the midnight watch by a father's grave, kept by a son to whom the dead man appears and gives a magic horse, often occurs in the skazkas. It is thoroughly in accordance with Slavonic ideas about the residence of the dead in their tombs, and their ability to assist their descendants in time of trouble. Appeals for aid to a dead parent are of frequent occurrence in the songs still sung by the Russian peasantry at funerals or over graves, especially in those in which orphans express their grief, calling upon the grave to open and the dead to appear and listen and help. So in the Indian story of Punchkin, the 7 hungry stepmother persecuted princesses go out every day and sit by their dead mother's tomb and cry and say, "Oh, mother, mother, cannot you see your poor children? How unhappy we are," etc., until a tree grows up out of the grave laden with fruits for their relief. So in the German tale, Cinderella is aided by the white bird, which dwells in the hazel tree growing out of her mother's grave. In one of the skazkas, a stepdaughter is assisted by her cow. The girl, following its instructions, gets in at one ear and out of the other, and finds all her tasks performed, all her difficulties removed. When it is killed, there springs from its bones a tree which befriends the girl and gains her a lordly husband. In a Servian variant of the story, it is distinctly stated that the protecting cow had been the girl's mother, manifestly in a previous state of existence, a purely Buddhistic idea. In several of the skazkas, we find an account of a princess who is won in a similar manner to that described in the story of Helena the Fair. In one case, a king promises to give his daughter to anyone who can pluck her portrait from the house, from the other side of ever so many beams. The youngest brother, Ivan the Simpleton, carries away the portrait and its cover at the 3rd trial. In another, a king offers his daughter and half his kingdom to him who can kiss the princess through 12 sheets of glass. The usual youngest brother is carried towards her so forcibly by his magic steed that, at the first trial, he breaks through 6 of the sheets of glass. At the second, says the story, he smashed all 12 of the sheets of glass, and he kissed the princess' priceless beauty, and she immediately stamped a mark upon his forehead. By this mark, after he has disappeared for some time, he is eventually recognized, and the princess is obliged to marry him. In a third story, the conditions of winning the princely bride are easier, for he who takes a leap on horseback and kisses the king's daughter on the balcony, to him will they give her to wife. In a fourth, the princess is to marry the man who, on horseback, bounds up to her on the third floor. At the first trial, the durac, or fool, reaches the first floor. At the next, the second, and the third time, he bounds right up to the princess and carries off from her a ring. In the Norse story of Dapplegrim, a younger brother saves a princess who had been stolen by a troll and hidden in a cave above a steep wall of rock as smooth as glass. Twice his magic horse tries in vain to surmount it, but the third time it succeeds and the youth carries off the princess, who ultimately becomes his wife. Another Norse story still more closely resembles the Russian tales. In The Princess on the Glass Hill, the hero gains a princess as his wife by riding up a hill of glass, on the top of which she sits with 3 golden apples in her lap, and by carrying off these precious fruits. He is enabled to perform this feat by a magic horse, which he obtains by watching his father's crops on 3 successive St. John's nights. In a Celtic story, a king promises his daughter and 2/3 of his kingdom to anyone who can get her out of a turret which was aloft on the top of 4 Carrigan towers. The hero Connell kicks one of the posts that was keeping the turret aloft. The post breaks and the turret falls. But Connell catches it in his hands before it reaches the ground. A door opens and out comes the Princess Sunbeam and throws her arms about Connell's neck. In most of these stories, the wife-gaining leap is so vaguely described that it is allowable to suppose that the original idea has been greatly obscured in the course of travel. In some Eastern stories, it is set in a much plainer light. In one modern collection, for instance, it occurs 4 times. A princess is so fond of her marble bath, which is like a little sea, with high spiked walls all around it, that she vows she will marry no one who cannot jump across it on horseback. Another princess determines to marry him only. Who can leap into the glass palace in which she dwells, surrounded by a wide river, and many kings and princes perish miserably in attempting to perform the feat. A third king's daughter lives in a garden, hedged round with 7 hedges made of bayonets, by which her suitors are generally transfixed. A fourth has vowed to marry no man who cannot jump on foot over the 7 hedges made of spears, and across the 7 great ditches that surround her house, and hundreds of thousands of Rajas have tried to do it and died in the attempt. The secluded princess of these stories may have been primarily akin to the heroine of the Sleeping Beauty tales, but no special significance appears now to be attributable to her isolation. The original idea seems to have been best preserved in the 2 legends of the wooing of Brynhild by Sigurd, in the first of which he awakens her from her magic sleep, while in the second he gains her hand. For Gunnar, by a daring and difficult ride, for him only would she have, who should ride through the flaming fire that was drawn about her hall. Gunnar fails to do so, but Sigurd succeeds. His horse leaps into the fire, and a mighty roar arose as the fire burned ever madder, and the earth trembled. And the flames went up even unto the heavens, nor had any dared to ride as he rode, even as it were through the deep murk. We will take next a story which is a great favourite in Russia, and which will serve as another illustration of the use made of magical properties in the skazkas. Emilian the Fool. There were once 3 brothers, of whom 2 were sharp-witted, but the third was a fool. The elder brothers set off to sell their goods in the towns down the river, and said to the fool, "Now mind, fool, obey our wives, and pay them respect as if they were your own mothers. We'll buy you red boots and a red caftan and a red shirt." The fool said to them, "Very good, I will pay them respect." They gave the fool their orders and went away to the downstream towns, But the fool stretched himself on top of the stove and remained lying there. His brothers' wives say to him, "What are you about, fool? Your brothers ordered you to pay us respect, and in return for that, each of them was going to bring you a present. But there you lie on the stove and don't do a bit of work. Go and fetch some water, at all events." The fool took a couple of pails and went to fetch the water. As he scooped it up, a pike happened to get into his pail. Says the fool, "Glory to God! Now I will cook this pike and will eat it all myself. I won't give a bit of it to my sisters-in-law. I'm savage with them." The pike says to him with a human voice, "Don't eat me, fool. If you'll put me back again into the water, you shall have good luck." Says the fool, "What sort of good luck shall I get from you?" "Why, this sort of good luck, whatever you say, that shall be done. Say, for instance, by the pike's command, at my request, go home, ye pails, and be set in your places." As soon as the fool had said this, the pails immediately went home of their own accord and became set in their places. The sisters-in-law looked and wondered, "What sort of a fool is this?" They say, "Why, he's so knowing, you see, that his pails have come home and gone to their places of their own accord." The fool came back and lay down on the stove. Again did his brothers' wives begin saying to him, "What are you lying on the stove for, fool? There's no wood for the fire. Go and fetch some." The fool took 2 axes and got into a sledge, but without harnessing a horse to it. "By the pike's command," he says, "at my request, drive into the forest, O sledge." Away went the sledge at a rattling pace, as if urged on by someone. The fool had to pass by a town, and the people he met were jammed into corners by his horseless sledge, in a way that was perfectly awful. They all began crying out, "Stop him! Catch him!" But they couldn't lay hands on him. The fool drove into the forest, got out of the sledge, sat down on a log, and said, "One of you axes fell the trees, while the other cuts them up into billets." "Well, the firewood was cut up and piled on the sledge." Then says the fool, "Now then, one of you axes, go and cut me a cudgel, as heavy a one as I can lift." The axe went and cut him a cudgel, and the cudgel came and lay on top of the load. The fool took his seat and drove off. He drove by the town, but the townspeople had met together and had been looking out for him for ever so long. So they stopped the fool, laid hands upon him, and began pulling him about. Says the fool, "By the pike's command, at my request, go, O cudgel, and bestir thyself." Out jumped the cudgel, and took to thumping and smashing, and knocked over ever such a lot of people. There they lay on the ground, strewed about like so many sheaves of corn. The fool got clear of them and drove home, heaped up the wood, and then lay down on the stove. Meanwhile, the townspeople got up a petition against him and denounced him to the king, saying, "Folks say there's no getting hold of him. The way we tried, we must entice him by cunning. And the best way of all will be to promise him a red shirt and a red caftan and red boots." So the king's runners came for the fool. "Go to the king," they say. "He will give you red boots, a red caftan, and a red shirt." "Well," the fool said, "by the pike's command, at my request, do thou. O stove, go to the king." He was seated on the stove at the time. The stove went, the fool arrived at the king's. The king was going to put him to death, but he had a daughter, and she took a tremendous liking to the fool. So she began begging her father to give her in marriage to the fool. Her father flew into a passion. He had them married, and then ordered them both to be placed in a tub, and the tub to be tarred over and thrown into the water. All which was done. Long did the tub float about on the sea. His wife began to beseech the fool. "Do something to get us cast on shore." "By the pike's command, at my request," said the fool. "Cast this tub ashore and tear it open." He and his wife stepped out of the tub. Then she again began imploring him to build some sort of a house. The fool said, "By the pike's command, at my request, let a marble palace be built, and let it stand immediately opposite the king's palace." This was all done in an instant. In the morning, the king saw the new palace, and sent to inquire who it was that lived in it. As soon as he learnt that his daughter lived there, that very minute he summoned her and her husband. They came. The king pardoned them, and they all began living together and flourishing. "The pike," observes Afanasieff, "is a fish of great repute in northern mythology. One of the old Russian songs, still sung at Christmas, tells how a pike comes from Novgorod, its scales of silver and gold, its back woven with pearls, a costly diamond gleaming in its head instead of eyes. And this song is one which promises wealth, a fact connecting the Russian fish with that Scandinavian pike which was a shape assumed by Anvari the dwarf guardian of the famous treasure, from which sprang the woes recounted in the Voelsunga saga and the Nibelungen Lied. According to a Lithuanian tradition, there is a certain lake which is ruled by the monstrous pike Strukis. It sleeps only once a year, and then only for a single hour. It used always to sleep on St. John's night, but a fisherman once took advantage of its slumber to catch a quantity of its scaly subjects. Strukis awoke in time to upset the fisherman's boat, but fearing a repetition of the attempt, it now changes each year the hour of its annual sleep. A gigantic pike figures also in the Kalevala. It would be easy to fill with similar stories not only a section of a chapter, but a whole volume. But instead of quoting any more of them, I will take a few specimens from a different, though a somewhat kindred group of tales, those which relate to the magic powers supposed to be wielded in modern times by dealers in the black art. Such narratives as these are to be found in every land, but Russia is specially rich in them. The faith of the peasantry in the existence of witches and wizards, turnskins and vampires, not having been as yet seriously shaken. Some of the stories relating to the supernatural witch, who evidently belongs to the demon world, have already been given. In those which I am about to quote, the wizard or witch who is mentioned is a human being, but one who has made a compact with evil spirits, and has thereby become endowed with strange powers. Such monsters as these are, throughout their lives, a terror to the district they inhabit, nor does their evil influence die with them. For after they have been laid in the earth, they assume their direst aspect, and as vampires bent on blood, night after night, they go forth from their graves to destroy. As I have elsewhere given some account of Slavonic beliefs in witchcraft, I will do little more at present than allow the stories to speak for themselves. They will be recognized as being akin to the tales about sorcery current farther west, but they are of a more savage nature. The rustic warlocks and witches of whom we are accustomed to hear have little, if any, of that thirst for blood which so unfavorably characterizes their Slavonic counterparts. Here is a story, by way of example, of a most gloomy nature. The Witch Girl. Late one evening, a Cossack rode into a village, pulled up at its last cottage, and cried, "Hi, master, will you let me spend the night here? Come in, if you don't fear death." What sort of a reply is that? Thought the Cossack, as he put his horse up in the stable. After he had given it its food, he went into the cottage. There he saw its inmates, men and women and little children, all sobbing and crying and praying to God. And when they had done praying, they began putting on clean shirts. "What are you crying about?" asked the Cossack. "Why, you see," replied the master of the house, "in our village, Death goes about at night. Into whatsoever cottage she looks, there, next morning, one has to put all the people who lived in it into coffins and carry them off to the graveyard. Tonight it's our turn. Never fear, master. Without God's will, no pig gets its fill." The people of the house lay down to sleep, but the Cossack was on the lookout and never closed an eye. Exactly at midnight the window opened. At the window appeared a witch all in white. She took a sprinkler, passed her arm into the cottage, and was just on the point of sprinkling when the Cossack suddenly gave his sabre a sweep and cut her arm off close to the shoulder. The witch howled, squealed, yelped like a dog, and fled away. But the Cossack picked up the severed arm, hid it under his cloak, washed away the stains of blood, and lay down to sleep. Next morning, the master and mistress awoke and saw that everyone, without a single exception, was alive and well, and they were delighted beyond expression. "If you like," says the Cossack, "I'll show you death. Call together all the sotniks and desyatniks as quickly as possible, and let's go through the village and look for her." Straightway, all the sotniks and desyatniks came together and went from house to house. In this one there's nothing, in that one there's nothing, until at last they come to the Ponomar's cottage. "Is all your family present?" asked the Cossack. "No, my own. One of my daughters is ill. She's lying on the stove there." The Cossack looked towards the stove. One of the girl's arms had evidently been cut off. Thereupon he told the whole story of what had taken place, and he brought out and showed the arm which had been cut off. The commune rewarded the Cossack with a sum of money and ordered that witch to be drowned. Stories of this kind are common in all lands, but the witches about whom they are told generally assume the forms of beasts of prey, especially of wolves or of cats. A long string of similar tales will be found in Dr. Wilhelm Hertz's excellent and exhaustive monograph on werewolves. Very important also is the Polish story told by Wojciech of the village which is attacked by the plague, embodied in the form of a woman, who roams from house to house in search of victims. One night, as she goes her rounds, all doors and windows have been barred against her, except one casement. This has been left open by a nobleman who is ready to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. The pest maiden arrives and thrusts her arm in at his window. The nobleman cuts it off, and so rids the village of its fatal visitor. In an Indian story, a hero undertakes to watch beside the couch of a haunted princess. When all is still, a Rakshasa appears on the threshold, opens the door, and thrusts into the room an arm which the hero cuts off. The fiend disappears howling, and leaves his arm behind. The horror of the next story is somewhat mitigated by a slight infusion of the grotesque, but this may arise from a mere accident and be due to the exceptional cheerfulness of some link in the chain of its narrators. The Headless Princess. In a certain country there lived a king, and this king had a daughter who was an enchantress. Near the royal palace there dwelt a priest, and the priest had a boy of 10 years old who went every day to an old woman to learn reading and writing. Now it happened one day that he came away from his lessons late in the evening, and as he passed by the palace he looked in at one of the windows. At that window the princess happened to be sitting and dressing herself. She took off her head, lathered it with soap, washed it with clean water, combed its hair, plaited its long back braid, and then put it back again in its proper place. The boy was lost in wonder. "What a clever creature," thinks he. "A downright witch." And when he got home, he began telling everyone how he had seen the princess without her head. All of a sudden, the king's daughter fell grievously ill, and she sent for her father and strictly enjoined him, saying, "If I die, make the priest's son read the Psalter over me 3 nights running." The princess died. They placed her in a coffin and carried it to church. Then the king summoned the priest and said, "Have you got a son?" "I have, your majesty." "Well then," said the king, "let him read the Psalter over my daughter 3 nights running." The priest returned home and told his son to get ready. In the morning, the priest's son went to his lessons and sat over his book, looking ever so gloomy. "What are you unhappy about?" asked the old woman. "How can I help being unhappy when I'm utterly done for? Why, what's the matter? Speak out plainly." "Well then, Granny, I've got to read psalms over the princess, and, do you know, she's a witch. I knew that before you did. But don't be frightened, there's a knife for you. When you go into the church, trace a circle round you. Then read away from your psalter, and don't look behind you. Whatever happens there, whatever horrors may appear, mind your own business and go on reading. Reading. But if you look behind you, it will be all over with you." In the evening, the boy went to the church, traced a circle round him with the knife, and betook himself to the Psalter. 12 o'clock struck. The lid of the coffin flew up. The princess arose, leapt out, and cried, "Now I'll teach you to go peeping through my windows and telling people what you saw." She began rushing at the priest's son, but she couldn't anyhow break into the circle. Then she began to conjure up all sorts of horrors. But in spite of all that she did, he went on reading and never gave a look round. And at daybreak the princess rushed at her coffin and tumbled into it at full length, all of a heap. The next night everything went on just the same. The priest's son wasn't a bit afraid, went on reading without a stop right up to daybreak, and in the morning went to the old woman. She asked him, "Well, have you seen horrors?" "Yes, Granny. It will be still more horrible this time. Here's a hammer for you and 4 nails. Knock them into the 4 corners of the coffin, and when you begin reading the Psalter, stick up the hammer in front of you." In the evening, the priest's son went to the church and did everything just as the old woman had told him. 12 o'clock struck. The coffin lid fell to the ground. The princess jumped up and began tearing from side to side and threatening the youth. Then she conjured up horrors, this time worse than before. It seemed to him as if a fire had broken out in the church. All the walls were wrapped in flames. But he held his ground and went on reading, never once looking behind him. Just before daybreak the princess rushed to her coffin. Then the fire seemed to go out immediately, and all the deviltry vanished. In the morning the king came to the church and saw that the coffin was open, and in the coffin lay the princess, face downwards. "What's the meaning of all this?" says he. The lad told him everything that had taken place. Then the king gave orders that an aspen stake should be driven into his daughter's breast, and that her body should be thrust into a hole in the ground. But he rewarded the priest's son with a heap of money and various lands. Perhaps the most remarkable among the stories of this class is the following, which comes from Little Russia. Those readers who are acquainted with the works of Gogol, the great Russian novelist, who was a native of that part of the country, will observe how closely he has kept to popular traditions in his thrilling story of the Vi, which has been translated into English from the French under the title of The King of the Gnomes. The Soldiers, Midnight Watch. Once upon a time there was a soldier who served God and the great Gosudar for 15 years without ever setting eyes on his parents. At the end of that time, there came an order from the Tsar to grant leave to the soldiers, to 25 of each company at a time, to go and see their families. Together with the rest, our soldier too got leave to go, and set off to pay a visit to his home in the government of Keef. After a time he reached Keef, visited the Lavra, prayed to God, bowed down before the holy relics, and then started again for his birthplace, a provincial town not far off. Well, he walked and walked. Suddenly there happens to meet him a fair maiden who was the daughter of a merchant in that same town, a most remarkable beauty. Now everyone knows that if a soldier catches sight of a pretty girl, nothing will make him pass her by quietly, but he hooks on to her somehow or other, and so this soldier gets alongside of the merchant's daughter, and says to her jokingly, "How now, fair damsel, not broken in to harness yet?" "God knows, soldier, who breaks in whom," replies the girl. "I may do it to you, or you to me." So saying, she laughed and went her way. Well, the soldier arrived at home, greeted his family, and rejoiced greatly at finding they were all in good health. Now he had an old grandfather, as white as a lun, who had lived 100 years and a bit. The soldier was gossiping with him and said, "As I was coming home, grandfather, I happened to meet an uncommonly fine girl, and, sinner that I am, I chaffed her. And she said to me, 'God knows, soldier, whether you will break me into harness, or I'll break you.'" "Eh, sirs? Whatever have you done?" "Why, that's the daughter of our merchant here, an awful witch. She sent more than one fine young fellow out of the white world." "Well, well, I'm not one of the timid ones either. You won't frighten me in a hurry. We'll wait and see what God will send." "No, no, grandson," says the grandfather. "If you don't listen to me, you won't be alive tomorrow." "Here's a nice fix," says the soldier. "Yes, such a fix that you've never known anything half so awful, even when soldiering." "What must I do then, grandfather?" "Why this. Provide yourself with a bridle and take a thick aspen cudgel, and sit quietly in the isba, don't stir a step anywhere. During the night she will come running in, and if she manages to say before you can, 'Stand still, my steed,' you will straightway turn into a horse. Then she will jump upon your back, and will make you gallop about until she has ridden you to death. But if you manage to say before she speaks, 'Tiprul, stand still, jade,' she will be turned into a mare. Then you must bridle her and jump on her back. She will run away with you over hill and dale, but do you hold your own, hit her over the head with the aspen cudgel, and go on hitting her until you beat her to death." The soldier hadn't expected such a job as this, but there was no help for it. So he followed his grandfather's advice, provided himself with a bridle and an aspen cudgel, took his seat in a corner, and waited to see what would happen. At the midnight hour, the passage door creaked, and the sound of steps was heard. The witch was coming. The moment the door of the room opened, the soldier immediately cried out, "T'proo! Stand still, jade!" The witch turned into a mare, and he bridled her, led her into the yard, and jumped on her back. The mare carried him off over hills and dales and ravines, and did all she could to try and throw her rider. But no! The soldier stuck on tight, and thumped her over the head like anything with the aspen cudgel, and went on treating her with a taste of the cudgel until he knocked her off her feet, and then pitched into her as she lay on the ground, gave her another 6 blows or so, and at last beat her to death. By daybreak he got home. "Well, my friend, how have you got on?" asked his grandfather. "Glory be to God, grandfather, I've beaten her to death." "All right, now lie down and go to sleep." The soldier lay down and fell into a deep slumber. Towards evening the old man awoke him. "Get up, grandson." He got up. "What's to be done now? As the merchant's daughter is dead, you see, her father will come after you, and will bid you to his house to read psalms over the dead body." "Well, grandfather, am I to go or not? If you go, there'll be an end of you, and if you don't go, there'll be an end of you. Still, it's best to go. But if anything happens, how shall I get out of it? Listen, grandson. When you go to the merchant's, he will offer you brandy. Don't you drink much. Drink only a moderate allowance. Afterwards the merchant will take you into the room in which his daughter is lying in her coffin, and will lock you in there. You will read out from the Psalter all the evening and up to midnight. Exactly at midnight, a strong wind will suddenly begin to blow. The coffin will begin to shake. Its lid will fall off. Well, as soon as these horrors begin, jump onto the stove as quick as you can. Squeeze yourself into a corner and silently offer up prayers. She won't find you there." Half an hour later came the merchant and besought the soldier, crying, "Ah, soldier, there's a daughter of mine dead. Come and read the Psalter over her." The soldier took a psalter and went off to the merchant's house. The merchant was greatly pleased, seated him at his table, and began offering him brandy to drink. The soldier drank, but only moderately, and declined to drink any more. The merchant took him by the hand and led him to the room in which the corpse lay. "Now then," he says, "read away at your psalter." Then he went out and locked the door. There was no help for it, so the soldier took to his psalter and read and read. Exactly at midnight there was a great blast of wind. The coffin began to rock. Its lid flew off. The soldier jumped quickly onto the stove, hid himself in a corner, guarded himself by a sign of the cross, and began whispering prayers. Meanwhile, the witch had leapt out of the coffin and was rushing about from side to side. Now here, now there. Then there came running up to her countless swarms of evil spirits. The room was full of them. "What are you looking for?" say they. "A soldier. He was reading here a moment ago, and now he's vanished." The devils eagerly set to work to hunt him up. They searched and searched, they rummaged in all the corners. At last they cast their eyes on the stove. At that moment, luckily for the soldier, the cocks began to crow. In the twinkling of an eye, all the devils had vanished, and the witch lay all of a heap on the floor. The soldier got down from the stove, laid her body in the coffin, covered it up all right with the lid, and betook himself again to his psalter. At daybreak came the master of the house, opened the door, and said, "Hail, soldier! I wish you good health, master merchant. Have you spent the night comfortably? Glory be to God." "Yes." "There are 50 roubles for you, but come again, friend, and read another night." "Very good, I'll come." The soldier returned home, lay down on the bench, and slept till evening. Then he awoke and said, "Grandfather, the merchant bid me go and read the Psalter another night. Should I go or not? If you go, you won't remain alive, and if you don't go, just the same. But you'd better go. Don't drink much brandy. Drink just what is right. And when the wind blows and the coffin begins to rock, slip straight into the stove. There no one will find you." The soldier got ready and went to the merchant's, who seated him at table and began plying him with brandy. Afterwards he took him to where the corpse was and locked him into the room. The soldier went on reading. Midnight came, the wind blew, the coffin began to rock, the coffin lid fell afar off on the ground. He was into the stove in a moment. Out jumped the witch and began rushing about. Round her swarmed devils. The room was full of them. "What are you looking for?" they cry. "Why, there he was reading a moment ago, and now he's vanished out of sight. I can't find him." The devils flung themselves on the stove. "Here's the place." They cried, "Where he was last night. There was the place, but he wasn't there." This way and that they rushed. Suddenly the cocks began to crow. The devils vanished. The witch lay stretched on the floor. The soldier stayed a while to recover his breath, crept out of the stove, put the merchant's daughter back in her coffin, and took to reading the Psalter again. Presently he looks round. The day has already dawned. His host arrives. "Hail, soldier!" says he. "I wish you good health, master merchant." Has the night passed comfortably? Glory be to God. Yes. Come along here then. The merchant led him out of the room, gave him 100 roubles, and said, "Come, please, and read here a third night. I shan't treat you badly." "Good, I'll come." The soldier returned home. "Well, grandson, what has God sent you?" says his grandfather. "Nothing much, grandfather. The merchant told me to come again. Should I go or not?" "If you go, you won't remain alive, and if you don't go, you won't remain alive. But you'd better go." "But if anything happens, where must I hide?" "I'll tell you, grandson. Buy yourself a frying pan and hide it so that the merchant shan't see it. When you go to his house, he'll try to force a lot of brandy on you. You look out, don't drink much, drink just what you can stand. At midnight, as soon as the wind begins to roar and the coffin to rock, do you, that very moment, climb on to the stovepipe and cover yourself over with the frying pan. There, no one will find you out." The soldier had a good sleep, bought himself a frying pan, hid it under his cloak, and towards evening went to the merchant's house. The merchant seated him at table and took to plying him with liquor, tried every possible kind of invitation and cajolery on him. "No," says the soldier, "that will do. I've had my whack, I won't have any more." "Well then, if you won't drink, come along and read your Psalter." The merchant took him to his dead daughter, left him alone with her, and locked the door. The soldier read and read. Midnight came, the wind blew, the coffin began to rock, the cover flew afar off. The soldier jumped up on the stovepipe, covered himself with the frying pan, protected himself with the sign of the cross, and awaited what was going to happen. Out jumped the witch and began rushing about. Round her came swarming countless devils. The Isba was full of them. They rushed about in search of the soldier. They looked into the stove. "Here's the place," they cried, "where he was last night. There's the place, but he's not there." This way and that they rush, cannot see him anywhere. Presently there stepped across the threshold a very old devil. "What are you looking for?" "The soldier. He was reading here a moment ago, and now he's disappeared." "Ah, no eyes! And who's that sitting on the stovepipe there?" The soldier's heart thumped like anything. He all but tumbled down on the ground. "There he is, sure enough," cried the devils. "But how are we to settle him? Surely it's impossible to reach him there?" "Impossible, forsooth. Run and lay your hands on a candle end which has been lighted without a blessing, having been uttered over it." In an instant the devils brought the candle end, piled up a lot of wood right under the stovepipe, and set it alight. The flame leapt high into the air. The soldier began to roast, first one foot, then the other. He drew up under him. "Now," thinks he, "my death has come." All of a sudden, luckily for him, the cocks began to crow. The devils vanished. The witch fell flat on the floor. The soldier jumped down from the stovepipe and began putting out the fire. When he had put it out, he set everything to rights, placed the merchant's daughter in her coffin, covered it up with a lid, and betook himself to reading the Psalter. At daybreak came the merchant, and listened at the door to find out whether the soldier was alive or not. When he heard his voice, he opened the door and said, "Hail, soldier! I wish you good health, master merchant. Have you passed the night comfortably? Glory be to God, I've seen nothing bad." The merchant gave him 150 roubles and said, "You've done a deal of work, soldier. Do a little more. Come here tonight and carry my daughter to the graveyard." Good, I'll come. Well, friend, what has God given? Glory be to God, grandfather, I've got off safe. The merchant has asked me to be at his house tonight to carry his daughter to the graveyard. Should I go or not? If you go, you won't be alive, and if you don't go, you won't be alive. But you must go, it will be better so. But what must I do? Tell me. Well, this. When you get to the merchant's, everything will be ready there. At 10 o'clock, the relations of the deceased will begin taking leave of her, and afterwards they will fasten 3 iron hoops round the coffin and place it on the funeral car. And at 11 o'clock they will tell you to take it to the graveyard. Do you drive off with the coffin, but keep a sharp lookout. One of the hoops will snap. Never fear, keep your seat bravely. A second will snap, keep your seat all the same. But when the 3rd hoop snaps, instantly jump onto the horse's back and through the duga, the wooden arch above its neck, and run away backwards. Do that, and no harm will come to you. The soldier lay down to sleep, slept till the evening, and then went to the merchant's. At 10 o'clock the relations began taking leave of the deceased. Then they set to work to fasten iron hoops round the coffin. They fastened the hoops, set the coffin on the funeral car, and cried, "Now then, soldier, drive off, and God speed you." The soldier got into the car and set off. At first he drove slowly, but as soon as he was out of sight, he let the horse go full split. Away he galloped, but all the while he kept an eye on the coffin. Snap went one hoop and then another. The witch began gnashing her teeth. "Stop!" she cried. "You shan't escape. I shall eat you up in another moment." "No, Dovey. Soldiers are crown property. No one is allowed to eat them." Here the last hoop snapped, onto the horse jumped the soldier, and through the duga, and then set off running backwards. The witch leapt out of the coffin and tore away in pursuit. Lighting on the soldier's footsteps, she followed them back to the horse, ran right round it, saw the soldier wasn't there, and set off again in pursuit of him. She ran and ran, lighted again on his footsteps, and again came back to the horse. Utterly at her wit's end, she did the same thing some 10 times over. Suddenly, the cocks began crowing. There lay the witch stretched out flat on the road. The soldier picked her up, put her in the coffin, slammed the lid down, and drove her to the graveyard. When he got there, he lowered the coffin into the grave, shovelled the earth on top of it, and returned to the merchant's house. "I've done it all," says he. "Catch hold of your horse." When the merchant saw the soldier, he stared at him with wide-open eyes. "Well, soldier," said he, "I know a good deal. And as to my daughter, we needn't speak of her. She was awfully sharp, she was. But, really, you know more than we do. Come now, master merchant, pay me for my work." So, the merchant handed him over 200 roubles. The soldier took them, thanked him, and then went home and gave his family a feast. The next chapter will contain a number of vampire stories which, in some respects, resemble these tales of homicidal corpses. But most of them belong, I think, to a separate group, due to a different myth or superstition from that which has given rise to such tales as those quoted above. The vampire is actuated by a thirst which can be quenched only by blood, and which impels it to go forth from the grave and destroy. But the enchanted corpses which rise at midnight and attempt to rend their watchers appear to owe their ferocity to demoniacal possession. After the death of a witch, her body is liable, says popular tradition, to be tenanted by a devil, as may be seen from Number II. And to corpses thus possessed have been attributed by the storytellers the terrible deeds which Indian tales relate of Rakshasas and other evil spirits. Thus in the story of Nishayadatta, In the 7th book of the Kathasarit the hero and the 4 pilgrims, his companions, have to pass a night in a deserted temple of Siva. It is haunted by a Yakshini, a female demon, who turns men by spells into brutes and then eats them. So they sit watching and praying beside a fire round which they have traced a circle of ashes. At midnight, the demon enchantress arrives, dancing and blowing on a flute made of a dead man's bone. Fixing her eyes on one of the pilgrims, she mutters a spell, accompanied by a wild dance. Out of the head of the doomed man grows a horn. He loses all command over himself, leaps up and dances into the flames. The Yakshini seizes his half-burnt corpse and devours it. Then she treats the 2nd and the 3rd pilgrim in the same way. But just as she is turning to the 4th, she lays her flute on the ground. In an instant, the hero seizes it and begins to blow it and to dance wildly around the Yakshini. Fixing his eyes upon her and applying to her the words of her own spell. Deprived by it of all power, she submits, and from that time forward renders the hero good service. In one of the skazkas, a malignant witch is destroyed by a benignant female power. It had been predicted that a certain baby princess would begin flying about the world as soon as she was 15. So her parents shut her up in a building in which she never saw the light of day, nor the face of a man. For it was illuminated by artificial means, and none but women had access to it. But one day, when her nurses and Mamselli had gone to a feast at the palace, she found a door unlocked, and made her way into the sunlight. After this, her attendants were obliged to allow her to go where she wished, when her parents were away. As she went roaming about the palace, she came to a cage in which a jar pizza lay as if dead. This bird, her guardians told her, slept soundly all day, but at night her papa flew about on it. Farther on, she came to a veiled portrait. When the veil was lifted, she cried in astonishment, "Can such beauty be?" and determined to fly on the jar pititsa to the original of the picture. So at night she sought the jar pititsa, which was sitting up and flapping its wings, and asked whether she might fly abroad on its back. The bird consented and bore her far away. 3 times it carried her to the room of the prince, whose portrait she had so much admired. On the 1st and 2nd occasion he remained asleep during her visit, having been plunged into a magic slumber by the jar ptitsa. But during her 3rd visit he awoke, and he and she wept and exchanged betrothal rings. So long did they remain talking that, before the jar pizza and his rider could get back, the day began to dawn. The bird sank lower and fell to the ground. Then the princess, thinking it was really dead, buried it in the earth, having first cut off its wings and attached them to herself so as to walk more lightly. After various adventures, she comes to a land of mourning. "Why are you so mournful?" she asks. "Because our king's son has gone out of his mind," is the reply. "He eats a man every night." Thereupon she goes to the king and obtains leave to watch the prince by night. As the clock strikes 12, the prince, who is laden with chains, makes a rush at her, but the wings of the jarpitza rustle around her, and he sits down again. This takes place 3 times, after which the light goes out. She leaves the room in search of the means of rekindling it, sees a glimmer in the distance, and sets off with a lantern in search of it. Presently she finds an old witch who is sitting before a fire, above which seethes a cauldron. "What have you got there?" she asks. "When this cauldron seethes," replies the witch, "within it does the heart of Prince Ivan rage madly." Pretending to be merely getting a light, the princess contrives to splash the seething liquid over the witch, who immediately falls dead. Then she looks into the cauldron, and there, in truth, she sees the prince's heart. When she returns to his room, he has recovered his senses. "Thank you for bringing a light," he says. "Why am I in chains?" "Thus and thus," says she. "You went out of your mind and ate people." Whereat he wonders greatly. The jar pizza, or firebird, which plays so important a part in this story, is worthy of special notice. Its name is sufficient to show its close connection with flame or light, and its appearance corresponds with its designation. Its feathers blaze with silvery or golden sheen. Its eyes shine like crystal. It dwells in a golden cage. In the depth of the night it flies into a garden and lights it up as brightly as could 1,000 burning fires. A single feather from its tail illuminates a dark room. It feeds upon golden apples, which have the power of bestowing youth and beauty, or according to a Croatian version, on magic grasses. Its song, according to Bohemian legends, heals the sick and restores sight to the blind. We have already seen that, as the phoenix, of which it seems to be a Slavonic counterpart, dies in the flame from which it springs again into life, so the jar pizza sinks into a death-like slumber when the day dawns, to awake to fresh life after the sunset. One of the skazkas about the jar pizza closely resembles the well-known German tale of the golden bird. But it is a chapbook story, and therefore of doubtful origin. King Wislav has an apple tree which bears golden fruits. These are stolen by a jar pititsa, which flies every night into the garden. So he orders his sons to keep watch there by turns. The elder brothers cannot keep awake and see nothing, but the youngest of the three, Prince Ivan, though he fails to capture the bird, secures one of its tail feathers. After a time, he leaves his home and goes forth in search of the bird. Aided by a wolf, he reaches the garden in which the jar pititsa lives and succeeds in taking it out of its golden cage. But trying, in spite of the wolf's warning, to carry off the cage itself, an alarm is sounded and he is taken prisoner. After various other adventures, he is killed by his envious brothers. But of course all comes right in the end. In a version of the story which comes from the Bukovina, one of the incidents is detailed at greater length than in either the German or the Russian tale. When the hero has been killed by his brothers, and they have carried off the jar pititsa, and their victim's golden steed, and his betrothed princess, as long as he lies dead, the princess remains mute and mournful. The horse refuses to eat, the bird is silent, and its cage is lusterless. But as soon as he comes back to life, the princess regains her spirits, and the horse its appetite. The jar pititsa recommences its magic song, and its cage flashes anew like fire. In another skazka, a sportsman finds in a forest a golden feather of the jar pititsa. Like fire does the feather shine. Against the advice of his heroic steed, he picks up the feather and takes it to the king, who sends him in search of the bird itself. Then he has wheat scattered on the ground, and at dawn he hides behind a tree near it. Presently the forest begins to roar, the sea rises in waves, and the jar pititsa flies up, lights upon the ground, and begins to peck the wheat. Then the heroic steed gallops up, sets its hoof upon the bird's wing, and presses it to the ground, so that the shooter is able to bind it with cords and take it to the king. In a variant of the story, the bird is captured by means of a trap, a cage in which pearls, large and small, have been strewed. I had intended to say something about the various golden-haired or golden-horned animals which figure in the skazkas, but it will be sufficient for the present to refer to the notices of them which occur in Prof. de Gubernatis's Zoological Mythology. And now I will bring this chapter to a close with the following weird story of the Warlock. There was once a muzhik, and he had 3 married sons. He lived a long while, and was looked upon by the village as a coldoon or wizard. When he was about to die, he gave orders that his sons' wives should keep watch over him after his death for 3 nights, taking 1 night apiece, that his body should be placed in the outer chamber, and that his sons' wives should spin wool to make him a caftan. He ordered, moreover, that no cross should be placed upon him, and that none should be worn by his daughters-in-law. Well, that same night the eldest daughter-in-law took her seat beside him with some grey wool, and began spinning. "Midnight arrives," says the father-in-law from his coffin. "Daughter-in-law, art thou there?" She was terribly frightened, but answered, "I am." "Art thou sitting?" "I sit." "Dost thou spin?" "I spin." "Grey wool?" "Grey." "For a caftan?" "For a caftan." He made a movement towards her. Then a second time he asked again, "Daughter-in-law, art thou there?" "I am." "Art thou sitting?" "I sit." "Dost thou spin?" "I spin." "Grey wool?" "Grey." "For a caftan?" "For a caftan." She shrank into the corner. He moved again, came a couple of yards nearer her. A third time he made a movement. She offered up no prayer. He strangled her, and then lay down again in his coffin. His sons removed her body, and next evening, in obedience to his paternal behest, they sent another of his daughters-in-law to keep watch. To her, just the same thing happened. He strangled her as he had done the first one. But the third was sharper than the other 2. She declared she had taken off her cross, but in reality she kept it on. She took her seat and spun, but said prayers to herself all the while. "Midnight arrives," says her father-in-law from his coffin. "Daughter-in-law, art thou there?" "I am," she replies. "Art thou sitting?" "I sit." "Dost thou spin?" "I spin." "Grey wool?" "Grey." "For a caftan?" "For a caftan." Just the same took place a second time. The third time, just as he was going to rush at her, she laid the cross upon him. He fell down and died. She looked into the coffin. There lay ever so much money. The father-in-law wanted to take it away with him, or, at all events, that only someone who could outdo him in cunning should get it. In one of the least intelligible of the West Highland tales, there is a scene which somewhat resembles the like-wake in this skazka. It is called The Girl and the Dead Man, and relates, among other strange things, how a youngest sister took service in a house where a corpse lay. She sat to watch the dead man, and she was sewing. In the middle of night he rose up and screwed up a grin. "If thou dost not lie down properly, I will give thee the one leathering with a stick." He lay down. At the end of a while, he rose on one elbow and screwed up a grin, and the third time he rose and screwed up a grin. When he rose the third time, she struck him a lounder of the stick. The stick stuck to the dead man, and the hand stuck to the stick, and out they were. Eventually she got a peck of gold and a peck of silver, and the vessel of cordial, and returned home. The obscurity of the Celtic tale forms a striking contrast to the lucidity of the Slavonic. The Russian peasant likes a clear statement of facts. The Highlander seems, like Coleridge's Scotch admirer, to find a pleasure in seeing an idea looming out of the mist. The Fox, Physician. There once was an old couple. The old man planted a cabbage head in the cellar under the floor of his cottage. The old woman planted one in the ash hole. The old woman's cabbage in the ash hole withered away entirely, but the old man's grew and grew up to the floor. The old man took his hatchet and cut a hole in the floor above the cabbage. The cabbage went on growing again, grew right up to the ceiling. Again the old man took his hatchet and cut a hole in the ceiling above the cabbage. The cabbage grew and grew right up to the sky. How was the old man to get a look at the head of the cabbage? He began climbing up the cabbage stalk, climbed and climbed, climbed and climbed, climbed right up to the sky, cut a hole in the sky, and crept through. There he sees a mill standing. The mill gives a turn. Out come a pie and a cake, with a pot of stewed grain on top. The old man ate his fill, drank his fill, and then lay down to sleep. When he had slept enough, he slid down to earth again and cried, "Old woman! Why, old woman! How one does live up in heaven! There's a mill there every time it turns. Out come a pie and a cake, with a pot of kasha on top. How can I get there, old man?" "Slip into this sack, old woman. I'll carry you up." The old woman thought a bit, and then got into the sack. The old man took the sack in his teeth and began climbing up to heaven. He climbed and climbed, long did he climb. The old woman got tired of waiting and asked, "Is it much farther, old man? We've half the way to go still." Again he climbed and climbed, climbed and climbed. A second time the old woman asked, "Is it much farther, old man?" The old man was just beginning to say, "Not much farther," when the sack slipped from between his teeth, and the old woman fell to the ground and was smashed all to pieces. The old man slid down the cabbage stalk and picked up the sack, but it had nothing in it but bones, and those broken very small. The old man went out of his house and wept bitterly. Presently a fox met him. "What are you crying about, old man?" "How can I help crying? My old woman is smashed to pieces. Hold your noise, I'll cure her." The old man fell at the fox's feet. "Only cure her. I'll pay whatever is wanted." "Well then, heat the bathroom. Carry the old woman there along with a bag of oatmeal and a pot of butter, and then stand outside the door, but don't look inside." The old man heated the bathroom, carried in what was wanted, and stood outside at the door. But the fox went into the bathroom, shut the door, and began washing the old woman's remains, washed, and kept looking about her all the time. "How's my old woman getting on?" asked the old man. "Beginning to stir," replied the fox, who then ate up the old woman, collected her bones and piled them up in a corner, and set to work to knead a hasty pudding. The old man waited and waited. Presently he asked, "How's my old woman getting on?" "Resting a bit," cried the fox as she gobbled up the hasty pudding. When she had finished it, she cried, "Old man, open the door wide." He opened it, and the fox sprang out of the bathroom and ran off home. The old man went into the bathroom and looked about him. Nothing was to be seen but the old woman's bones under the bench, and those picked so clean. As for the oatmeal and the butter, they had all been eaten up, so the old man was left alone and in poverty. This story is evidently a combination of two widely differing tales. The catastrophe we may for the present pass over, but about the opening some few words may be said. The beanstalk myth is one which is found among so many peoples in such widely distant regions, and it deals with ideas of such importance that no contribution to its history can be considered valueless. Most remarkable among its numerous forms are those American and Malayan Polynesian versions of the Heaven Tree story, which Mr. Tyler has brought together in his early history of mankind. In Europe, it is usually found in a very crude and fragmentary form, having been preserved, for the most part, as the introduction to some other story which has proved more attractive to the popular fancy. The Russian versions are all, as far as I am aware, of this nature. I have already mentioned one of them, in which, also, the fox plays a prominent part. Its opening words are, "There once lived an old man and an old woman, and they had a little daughter. One day she was eating beans, and she let one fall on the ground. The bean grew and grew and grew right up to heaven. The old man climbed up to heaven, slipped in there, walked and walked, admired and admired, and said to himself, "I'll go and fetch the old woman. Won't she just be delighted?" So he tries to carry his wife up the beanstalk, but grows faint and lets her fall. She is killed, and he calls in the fox as wailer. In a variant of the fox physician, from the Volobda government, it is a pea which gives birth to the wondrous tree. There lived an old man and an old woman. The old man was rolling a pea about, and it fell on the ground. They searched and searched a whole week, but they couldn't find it. The week passed by, and the old people saw that the pea had begun to sprout. They watered it regularly, and the pea set to work and grew higher than the isba. When the peas ripened, the old man climbed up to where they were, plucked a great bundle of them, and began sliding down the stalk again. But the bundle fell out of the old man's hands and killed the old woman. According to another variant, there once lived a grandfather and a grandmother, and they had a hut. The grandfather sowed a bean under the table, and the grandmother a pea. A hen gobbled up the pea, but the bean grew up as high as the table. They moved the table, and the bean grew still higher. They cut away the ceiling and the roof. It went on growing until it grew right up to the heavens. Nebo! The grandfather climbed up to heaven. Climbed and climbed. There stood a hut, Katka, its walls of pancakes, its benches of white bread, the stove of buttered curds. He began to eat, ate his fill, and lay down above the stove to sleep. In came 12 sister goats. The first had 1 eye, the second 2 eyes, the third 3, and so on with the rest, the last having 12 eyes. They saw that someone had been meddling with their hut, so they put it to rights, and when they went out, they left the one-eyed to keep watch. Next day the grandfather again climbed up there, saw One Eye, and began to mutter, "Sleep, I sleep." The goat went to sleep. The man ate his fill and went away. Next day the 2-eyed kept watch, and after it the 3-eyed, and so on. The grandfather always muttered his charm, "Sleep, I, sleep, second eye, sleep, third eye," and so on. But with the 12th goat he failed, for he charmed only 11 of her eyes. The goat saw him with the 12th, and caught him, and there the story ends. In another instance, the myth has been turned into one of those tales of the Munchausen class, the title of which is The Saw. Ne jubel, ne slushi, i.e., if you don't like, don't listen. The final words being understood, but let me tell you a story. A cock finds a pea in the part of a cottage under the floor, and begins calling to the hens. The cottager hears the call, drives away the cock, and pours water over the pea. It grows up to the floor, up to the ceiling, up to the roof. Each time way is made for it, and finally it grows right up to heaven. "Do, Nebushka," says the Maujik to his wife. "Wife, wife, I say, shall I climb up into heaven and see what's going on there? Maybe there's sugar there, and mead, lots of everything." "Climb away if you've a mind to," replies his wife. So he climbs up, and there he finds a large wooden house. He enters in and sees a stove garnished with sucking pigs and geese and pies and everything which the soul could desire. But the stove is guarded by a 7-eyed goat. The moujik charms 6 of the eyes to sleep, but overlooks the 7th. With it, the goat sees him eat and drink and then go to sleep. The housemaster comes in, is informed by the goat of all that has occurred, flies into a passion, calls his servants, and has the intruder turned out of the house. When the moujik comes to the place where the pea-stalk had been, he looks around. No pea-stalk is there. He collects the cobwebs which float on the summer air, and of them he makes a cord. This he fastens to the edge of heaven, and begins to descend. Long before he reaches the earth, he comes to the end of his cord, so he crosses himself and lets go. Falling into a swamp, he remains there some time. At last, a duck builds her nest on his head and lays an egg in it. He catches hold of the duck's tail, and the bird pulls him out of the swamp, whereupon he goes home rejoicing, taking with him the duck and her egg, and tells his wife all that has happened. In another variant, it is an acorn, which is sown under the floor. From it springs an oak, which grows to the skies. The old man of the story climbs up it in search of acorns, and reaches heaven. There he finds a handmill and a cock with a golden comb, both of which he carries off. The mill grinds pies and pancakes, and the old man and his wife live in plenty. But after a time, a baron or seigneur steals the mill. The old people are in despair, but the golden-combed cock flies after the mill, perches on the baron's gates, and cries, "Kukureku, boyarin, boyarin, give us back our golden sky-blue mill." The cock is flung into the well, but it drinks all the water, flies up to the baron's house, and there reiterates its demand. Then it is thrown into the fire, but it extinguishes the flames, flies right into the baron's guest chamber, and crows as before. The guests disperse. The baron runs after them, and the golden-combed cock seizes the mill and flies away with it. In a variant from the Smolensk government, it is the wife who climbs up the pea-stalk, while the husband remains down below. When she reaches the top, she finds an izbushka, or cottage there. Its walls made of pies, its tables of cheese, its stove of pancakes, and so forth. After she has feasted and gone to sleep in a corner, in come 3 goats, of which the first has 2 eyes and 2 ears, the second has 3 of each of these organs, and the third has 4. The old woman sends to sleep the ears and the eyes of the first and the second goat, but when the third watches, it retains the use of its 4th eye and 4th ear, in spite of the incantations uttered by the intruder, and so finds her out. On being questioned, she explains that she has come from the earthly realm into the heavenly, and promises not to repeat her visit if she is dismissed in peace. So the goats let her go, and give her a bag of nuts, apples, and other good things to take with her. She slides down the pea-stalk and tells her husband all that has happened. He persuades her to undertake a second ascent together with him, so off they set in company, their young granddaughter climbing after them. Suddenly the pea-stalk breaks, they fall headlong and are never heard of again. Since that time, says the story, no one has ever set foot in that heavenly izbushka, so no one knows anything more about it. Clearer and fuller than these vague and fragmentary sketches of a heavenly realm are the pictures contained in the Russian folk tales of the underground world. But it is very doubtful how far the stories in which they figure represent ancient Slavonic ideas. In the name, if not in the nature, of the ad or subterranean abode of evil spirits and sinful souls, we recognize the influence of the Byzantine Hades, but most of the tales in which it occurs are supposed to draw their original inspiration from Indian sources, while they owe to Christian, Brahmanic, Buddhistic, and Mohammedan influences the form in which they now appear. To these legends, as the folk tales are styled, in which the saints or their ghostly enemies occur, belongs the following narrative of the Fiddler in Hell. There was a certain mujik who had 3 sons. His life was a prosperous one, and he laid by money enough to fill 2 pots. The one he buried in his corn kiln, the other under the gate of his farmyard. Well, the mujik died, and never said a word about the money to anyone. One day there was a festival in the village. A fiddler was on his way to the revel when, all of a sudden, He sank into the earth, sank right through, and tumbled into hell, lighting exactly there where the rich moujik was being tormented. "Hail, friend," says the fiddler. "It's an ill wind that's brought you hither," answers the moujik. "This is hell, and in hell here I sit." "What was it brought you here, uncle?" "It was money. I had much money. I gave none to the poor. 2 pots of it did I bury underground. See now, they are going to torment me, to beat me with sticks, to tear me with nails." "Whatever shall I do?" cried the fiddler. "Perhaps they'll take to torturing me too. If you go and sit on the stove behind the chimney pipe, and don't eat anything for 3 years, then you will remain safe." The fiddler hid behind the stovepipe. Then came fiends, and they began to beat the rich moujik, reviling him the while, and saying, "There's for thee, O rich man. Pots of money didst thou bury, but thou couldst not hide them. There didst thou bury them, that we might not be able to keep watch over them. At the gate people are always riding about. The horses crush our heads with their hoofs, and in the corn kiln we get beaten with flails." As soon as the fiends had gone away, the moujik said to the fiddler, "If you get out of here, tell my children to dig up the money. 1 pot is buried at the gate, and the other in the corn kiln, and to distribute it among the poor." Afterwards there came a whole roomful of evil ones, and they asked the rich moujik, "What have you got here that smells so Russian?" "You have been in Russia and brought away a Russian smell with you," replied the moujik. "How could that be?" they said. Then they began looking. They found the fiddler, and they shouted, "Ha, ha, ha, here's a fiddler." They pulled him off the stove and set him to work fiddling. He played 3 years, though it seemed to him only 3 days. Then he got tired and said, "Here's a wonder. After playing a whole evening, I used always to find all my fiddle strings snapped. But now, though I've been playing for 3 whole days, they are all sound. May the Lord grant us his blessing." No sooner had he uttered these words than every one of the strings snapped. "There now, brothers," says the fiddler, "you can see for yourselves. The strings are snapped. I've nothing to play on." "Wait a bit," said one of the fiends. "I've got 2 hanks of catgut. I'll fetch them for you." He ran off and fetched them. The fiddler took the strings, screwed them up, and again uttered the words, "May the Lord grant us his blessing." In a moment, snap went both hanks. "No, brothers," said the fiddler, "your strings don't suit me. I've got some of my own at home. By your leave, I'll go for them." The fiends wouldn't let him go. "You wouldn't come back," they say. "Well, if you won't trust me, send someone with me as an escort." The fiends chose one of their number and sent him with the fiddler. The fiddler got back to the village. There he could hear that, in the farthest cottage, a wedding was being celebrated. "Let's go to the wedding," he cried. "Come along," said the fiend. They entered the cottage. Everyone there recognized the fiddler and cried, "Where have you been hiding these 3 years?" "I have been in the other world," he replied. They sat there and enjoyed themselves for some time. Then the fiend beckoned to the fiddler, saying, "It's time to be off." But the fiddler replied, "Wait a little longer. Let me fiddle away a bit and cheer up the young people." And so they remained sitting there till the cocks began to crow. Then the fiend disappeared. After that, the fiddler began to talk to the sons of the rich moujik, and said, "Your father bids you dig up the money. 1 potful is buried at the gate, and the other in the corn kiln, and distribute the whole of it among the poor." Well, they dug up both the pots, and began to distribute the money among the poor. But the more they gave away the money, the more did it increase. Then they carried out the pots to a crossway. Everyone who passed by took out of them as much money as his hand could grasp, and yet the money wouldn't come to an end. Then they presented a petition to the emperor, and he ordained as follows. There was a certain town, the road to which was a very roundabout one. It was some 50 versts long, whereas if it had been made in a straight line, it would not have been more than 5. And so the emperor ordained that a bridge should be made the whole way. Well, they built a bridge 5 versts long, and this piece of work cleared out both the pots. About that time, a certain maid bore a son, and deserted him in his infancy. The child neither ate nor drank for 3 years, and an angel of God always went about with him. Well, this child came to the bridge, and cried, "Ah, what a glorious bridge! God grant the kingdom of heaven to him at whose cost it was built." The Lord heard this prayer, and ordered his angels to release the rich Maujik from the depths of hell. With the bridge-building episode in this legend may be compared the opening of another Russian story. In it, a merchant is described as having much money but no children. So he and his wife began to pray to God, entreating him to give them a child for solace in their youth, for support in their old age, for sole remembrance after death. And they took to feeding the poor and distributing alms. Besides all this, they resolved to build, for the use of all the faithful, a long bridge across swamps and where no man could find a footing. Much wealth did the merchant expend, but he built the bridge, and when the work was completed, he sent his manager Fedor, saying, "Go and sit under the bridge, and listen to what folks say about me, whether they bless me or revile me." Fedor set off, sat under the bridge, and listened. Presently 3 holy elders went over the bridge, and said one to another, "How ought the man who built this bridge to be rewarded? Let there be born to him a fortunate son. Whatsoever that son says, it shall be done. Whatsoever he desires, that will the Lord bestow." The rest of the story closely resembles the German tale of The Pink. In the corresponding Bohemian story of The Treacherous Servant, it may be observed, the bridge-building incident has been preserved. But I will not dwell any longer on the story of the Fiddler, as I propose to give some account in the next chapter of several other tales of the same class, in most of which such descriptions of evil spirits are introduced as had manifestly been altered into what their narrators considered to be in accordance with Christian teaching. And so I will revert to those ideas about the dead, and about their abiding place, which the modern Slavonians seem to have inherited from their heathen ancestors, and I will attempt to illustrate them by a few Russian ghost stories. Those stories are, as a general rule, of a most ghastly nature, but there are a few into the composition of which the savage element does not enter. The Dead Mother, which has already been quoted, belongs to the latter class, and so does the following tale, which, as it bears no title in the original, we may name The Ride on the Graveston. Late one evening, a certain artisan happened to be returning home from a jovial feast in a distant village. There met him on the way an old friend, one who had been dead some 10 years. "Good health to you," said the dead man. "I wish you good health," replied the reveller, and straightway forgot that his acquaintance had ever so long ago bidden the world farewell. "Let's go to my house. We'll quaff a cup or two once more. Come along. On such a happy occasion as this meeting of ours, we may as well have a drink." They arrived at a dwelling, and there they drank and revelled. "Now then, goodbye. It's time for me to go home," said the artisan. "Stay a bit. Where do you want to go now? Spend the night here with me." "No, brother. Don't ask me. It cannot be. I've business to do tomorrow, so I must get home as early as possible." "Well, goodbye." "But why should you walk? Better get on my horse. It will carry you home quickly." "Thanks. Let's have it." He got on its back and was carried off just as a whirlwind flies. All of a sudden, a cock crew. It was awful. All around were graves, and the rider found he had a gravestone under him. Of a somewhat similar nature is the story of The Two Friends. In the days of old, there lived in a certain village 2 young men. They were great friends, went to Bisaidas together, in fact, regarded each other as brothers, and they made this mutual agreement. Whichever of the two should marry first was to invite his comrade to his wedding, and it was not to make any difference whether he was alive or dead. About a year after this, one of the young men fell ill and died. A few months later, his comrade took it into his head to get married. So he collected all his kinsmen and set off to fetch his bride. Now it happened that they drove past the graveyard, and the bridegroom recalled his friend to mind and remembered his old agreement. So he had the horses stopped, saying, "I'm going to my comrade's grave. I shall ask him to come and enjoy himself at my wedding. A right trusty friend was he to me." So he went to the grave and began to call aloud, "Comrade dear, I invite thee to my wedding." Suddenly the grave yawned. The dead man arose and said, "Thanks be to thee, brother, that thou hast fulfilled thy promise. And now that we may profit by this happy chance, enter my abode. Let us quaff a glass apiece of grateful drink. I'd have gone, only the marriage procession is stopping outside. All the folks are waiting for me." "Hey, brother," replied the dead man, "surely it won't take long to toss off a glass." The bridegroom jumped into the grave. The dead man poured him out a cup of liquor. He drank it off, and 100 years passed away. "Quaff another cup, dear friend," said the dead man. He drank a second cup. 200 years passed away. "Now, comrade dear, quaff a third cup," said the dead man, "and then go in God's name and celebrate thy marriage." He drank the third cup. 300 years passed away. The dead man took leave of his comrade. The coffin lid fell. The grave closed. The bridegroom looked around. Where the graveyard had been was now a piece of waste ground. No road was to be seen, no kinsmen, no horses. All around grew nettles and tall grass. He ran to the village, but the village was not what it used to be. The houses were different. The people were all strangers to him. He went to the priests, but the priest was not the one who used to be there, and told him about everything that had happened. The priest searched through the church books and found that 300 years before this occurrence had taken place, a bridegroom had gone to the graveyard on his wedding day and had disappeared. And his bride, after some time had passed by, had married another man. The Rip Van Winkle. Story is too well known to require more than a passing allusion. It was doubtless founded on one of the numerous folk tales which correspond to the Christian legend of the 7 Sleepers of Ephesus, itself an echo of an older tale. See Baring Gould, Curious Myths, P.P. and Cox, Mythology of the Aryan Nations. And to that of the monk who listens to a bird singing in the convent garden, and remains entranced for the space of many years, of which latter legend a Russian version occurs in Chudinsky's collection. No. P. Very close indeed is the resemblance between the Russian story of The Two Friends and the Norse Friends in Life and Death. Asbjörnson's new series, No. Pp. In the latter, the bridegroom knocks hard and long on his dead friend's grave. At length its occupant appears, and accounts for his delay by saying he had been far away when the first knocks came, and so had not heard them. Then he follows the bridegroom to church, and from church, and afterwards the bridegroom sees him back to his tomb. On the way, the living man expresses a desire to see something of the world beyond the grave, and the corpse fulfills his wish, having first placed on his head a sod cut in the graveyard. After witnessing many strange sights, the bridegroom is told to sit down and wait till his guide returns. When he rises to his feet, he is all overgrown with mosses and shrub. Varhan overvoxen, medmos ogbushka. And when he reaches the outer world, he finds all things changed. But from these dim sketches of a life beyond, or rather within the grave, in which memories of old days and old friendships are preserved by ghosts of an almost genial and entirely harmless disposition, we will now turn to those more elaborate pictures in which the dead are represented under an altogether terrific aspect. It is not as an incorporeal being that the visitor from the other world is represented in the skazkas. He comes not as a mere phantom, intangible, impalpable, incapable of physical exertion, haunting the dwelling which once was his home, or the spot to which he is drawn by the memory of some unexpiated crime. It is as a vitalized corpse that he comes to trouble mankind, often subject to human appetites, constantly endowed with more than human strength and malignity. His apparel is generally that of the grave, and he cannot endure to part with it, as may be seen from the following story. The Shroud. In a certain village there was a girl who was lazy and slothful, hated working, but would gossip and chatter away like anything. Well, she took it into her head to invite the other girls to a spinning party, for in the villages, as everyone knows, it is the lazybones who gives the spinning feast, and the sweet-toothed are those who go to it. Well, on the appointed night she got her spinners together. They span for her, and she fed them and feasted them. Among other things they chatted about was this: which of them all was the boldest? Says the lazybones, "Lejaka, I'm not afraid of anything." "Well then," say the spinners, "if you're not afraid, go past the graveyard to the church, take down the holy picture from the door and bring it here." "Good, I'll bring it. Only each of you must spin me a distaff full." That was just her sort of notion, to do nothing herself, but to get others to do it for her. Well, she went, took down the picture, and brought it home with her. Her friends all saw that, sure enough, it was the picture from the church. But the picture had to be taken back again, and it was now the midnight hour. Who was to take it? At length the lazybones said, "You girls go on spinning. I'll take it back myself. I'm not afraid of anything." So she went and put the picture back in its place. As she was passing the graveyard on her return, she saw a corpse in a white shroud seated on a tomb. It was a moonlight night. Everything was visible. She went up to the corpse and drew away its shroud from it. The corpse held its peace, not uttering a word. No doubt the time for it to speak had not come yet. Well, she took the shroud and went home. "There," says she, "I've taken back the picture and put it in its place, and, what's more, here's a shroud I took away from a corpse." Some of the girls were horrified. Others didn't believe what she said and laughed at her. But after they had supped and lain down to sleep, all of a sudden the corpse tapped at the window and said, "Give me my shroud. Give me my shroud." The girls were so frightened they didn't know whether they were alive or dead. But the lazybones took the shroud, went to the window, opened it and said, "There, take it." "No," replied the corpse, "restore it to the place you took it from." Just then the cocks suddenly began to crow. The corpse disappeared. Next night, when the spinners had all gone home to their own houses, at the very same hour as before, the corpse came, tapped at the window, and cried, "Give me my shroud." Well, The girl's father and mother opened the window and offered him his shroud. "No," says he, "let her take it back to the place she took it from." "Really now, how could one go to a graveyard with a corpse? What a horrible idea," she replied. Just then the cocks crew. The corpse disappeared. Next day the girl's father and mother sent for the priest, told him the whole story, and entreated him to help them in their trouble. "Couldn't a service be performed?" they said. The priest reflected a while, then he replied, "Please to tell her to come to church tomorrow." Next day the lazybones went to church. The service began. Numbers of people came to it. But just as they were going to sing the cherubim song, there suddenly arose, goodness knows whence, so terrible a whirlwind that all the congregation fell flat on their faces. And it caught up that girl and then flung her down on the ground. The girl disappeared from sight. Nothing was left of her but her back hair. They are generally the corpses of wizards or of other sinners who have led specially unholy lives, which leave their graves by night and wander abroad. Into such bodies, it is held, demons enter, and the combination of fiend and corpse goes forth as the terrible vampire thirsting for blood. Of the proceedings of such a being, the next story gives a detailed account, from which, among other things, may be learnt the fact that Slavonic corpses attach great importance to their coffin lids as well as to their shrouds. The coffin lid. A moujik was driving along one night with a load of pots. His horse grew tired, and all of a sudden it came to a standstill alongside of a graveyard. The moujik unharnessed his horse and set it free to graze. Meanwhile he laid himself down on one of the graves. But somehow he didn't go to sleep. He remained lying there some time. Suddenly the grave began to open beneath him. He felt the movement and sprang to his feet. The grave opened, and out of it came a corpse wrapped in a white shroud, and holding a coffin lid came out and ran to the church, laid the coffin lid at the door, and then set off for the village. The moujik was a daring fellow. He picked up the coffin lid and remained standing beside his cart, waiting to see what would happen. After a short delay, the dead man came back and was going to snatch up his coffin lid, but it was not to be seen. Then the corpse began to track it out, traced it up to the moujik, and said, "Give me my lid. If you don't, I'll tear you to bits." "And my hatchet, how about that?" answers the moujik. "Why, it's I who'll be chopping you into small pieces." "Do give it back to me, good man," begs the corpse. "I'll give it when you tell me where you've been and what you've done." "Well, I've been in the village, and there I've killed a couple of youngsters." "Well then, now tell me how they can be brought back to life." The corpse reluctantly made answer, "Cut off the left skirt of my shroud and take it with you. When you come into the house where the youngsters were killed, pour some live coals into a pot and put the piece of the shroud in with them, and then lock the door. The lads will be revived by the smoke immediately." The moujik cut off the left skirt of the shroud and gave up the coffin lid. The corpse went to its grave. The grave opened, but just as the dead man was descending into it, all of a sudden the cocks began to crow, and he hadn't time to get properly covered over. One end of the coffin lid remained sticking out of the ground. The moujik saw all this and made a note of it. The day began to dawn. He harnessed his horse and drove into the village. In one of the houses he heard cries and wailing. In he went. There lay two dead lads. "Don't cry," says he. "I can bring them to life." "Do bring them to life, kinsman," say their relatives. "We'll give you half of all we possess." The moujik did everything as the corpse had instructed him, and the lads came back to life. Their relatives were delighted, but they immediately seized the moujik and bound him with cords, saying, No, no, trickster, we'll hand you over to the authorities. Since you knew how to bring them back to life, maybe it was you who killed them. What are you thinking about, true believers? Have the fear of God before your eyes, cried the moujik. Then he told them everything that had happened to him during the night. Well, they spread the news through the village. The whole population assembled and swarmed into the graveyard. They found out the grave from which the dead man had come out. They tore it open, and they drove an aspen stake right into the heart of the corpse, so that it might no more rise up and slay. But they rewarded the moujik richly, and sent him away home with great honor. It is not only during sleep that the vampire is to be dreaded. At crossroads, or in the neighborhood of cemeteries, an animated corpse of this description often lurks, watching for some unwary wayfarer whom it may be able to slay and eat. Past such dangerous spots as these, the belated villager will speed with timorous steps, remembering, perhaps, some such uncanny tale as that which comes next. The two corpses. A soldier had obtained leave to go home on furlough to pray to the holy images and to bow down before his parents. And as he was going his way, at a time when the sun had long set and all was dark around, it chanced that he had to pass by a graveyard. Just then he heard that someone was running after him and crying, "Stop! You can't escape!" He looked back, and there was a corpse running and gnashing its teeth. The soldier sprang on one side with all his might to get away from it, caught sight of a little chapel, and bolted straight into it. There wasn't a soul in the chapel, but stretched out on a table there lay another corpse, with tapers burning in front of it. The soldier hid himself in a corner, and remained there, hardly knowing whether he was alive or dead, but waiting to see what would happen. Presently up ran the first corpse, the one that had chased the soldier and dashed into the chapel. Thereupon the one that was lying on the table jumped up and cried to it, "What hast thou come here for? I've chased a soldier in here, so I'm going to eat him." "Come now, brother, he's run into my house. I shall eat him myself." "No, I shall. No, I shall." And they set to work fighting. The dust flew like anything. They'd have gone on fighting ever so much longer, only the cocks began to crow. Then both the corpses fell lifeless to the ground, and the soldier went on his way homeward in peace, saying, "Glory be to thee, O Lord! I am saved from the wizards. Even the possession of arms and the presence of a dog will not always, it seems, render a man secure from this terrible species of cutthroat, the dog and the corpse." A moujik went out in pursuit of game one day and took a favorite dog with him. He walked and walked through woods and bogs, but got nothing for his pains. At last, the darkness of night surprised him. At an uncanny hour he passed by a graveyard, and there, at a place where two roads met, he saw standing a corpse in a white shroud. The moujik was horrified, and knew not which way to go, whether to keep on or to turn back. "Well, whatever happens, I'll go on," he thought. And on he went, his dog running at his heels. When the corpse perceived him, it came to meet him, not touching the earth with its feet, but keeping about a foot above it, the shroud fluttering after it. When it had come up with the sportsman, it made a rush at him, but the dog seized hold of it by its bare calves and began a tussle with it. When the moujik saw his dog and the corpse grappling with each other, he was delighted that things had turned out so well for himself, and he set off running home with all his might. The dog kept up the struggle until cock-crow, when the corpse fell motionless to the ground. Then the dog ran off in pursuit of its master, caught him up just as he reached home, and rushed at him, furiously trying to bite and to rend him. So savage was it, and so persistent, that it was as much as the people of the house could do to beat it off. "Whatever has come over the dog?" asked the mojik's old mother. "Why should it hate its master so?" The mojik told her all that had happened. "A bad piece of work, my son," said the old woman. "The dog was disgusted at your not helping it. There it was, fighting with the corpse, and you deserted it and thought only of saving yourself. Now it will owe you a grudge for ever so long." Next morning, while the family were going about the farmyard, the dog was perfectly quiet. But the moment its master made his appearance, it began to growl like anything. They fastened it to a chain. For a whole year they kept it chained up. But in spite of that, it never forgot how its master had offended it. One day it got loose, flew straight at him, and began trying to throttle him. So they had to kill it. In the next story, a most detailed account is given of the manner in which a vampire sets to work, and also of the best means of ridding the world of it. The soldier and the vampire. A certain soldier was allowed to go home on furlough. Well, he walked and walked, and after a time he began to draw near to his native village. Not far off from that village lived a miller in his mill. In old times the soldier had been very intimate with him. Why shouldn't he go and see his friend? He went. The miller received him cordially, and at once brought out liquor, and the two began drinking, and chattering about their ways and doings. All this took place towards nightfall, and the soldier stopped so long at the miller's that it grew quite dark. When he proposed to start for his village, his host exclaimed, "Spend the night here, trooper. It's very late now, and perhaps you might run into mischief." "How so?" "God is punishing us. A terrible warlock has died among us, and by night he rises from his grave, wanders through the village, and does such things as bring fear upon the very boldest. How could even you help being afraid of him? Not a bit of it. A soldier is a man who belongs to the crown, and crown property cannot be drowned in water nor burnt in fire. I'll be off. I'm tremendously anxious to see my people as soon as possible." Off he set. His road lay in front of a graveyard. On one of the graves he saw a great fire blazing. "What's that?" thinks he. "Let's have a look." When he drew near, he saw that the warlock was sitting by the fire, sewing boots. "Hail, brother!" calls out the soldier. The warlock looked up and said, "What have you come here for?" "Why, I wanted to see what you're doing." The warlock threw his work aside and invited the soldier to a wedding. "Come along, brother," says he. "Let's enjoy ourselves. There's a wedding going on in the village." "Come along," says the soldier. They came to where the wedding was. There they were given drink and treated with the utmost hospitality. The warlock drank and drank, revelled and revelled, and then grew angry. He chased all the guests and relatives out of the house, threw the wedded pair into a slumber, took out 2 fials and an awl, pierced the hands of the bride and bridegroom with the awl, and began drawing off their blood. Having done this, he said to the soldier, "Now let's be off." Well, they went off. On the way the soldier said, "Tell me, why did you draw off their blood in those fields?" "Why, in order that the bride and bridegroom might die. Tomorrow morning no one will be able to wake them. I alone know how to bring them back to life." "How's that managed?" "The bride and bridegroom must have cuts made in their heels, and some of their own blood must then be poured back into those wounds. I've got the bridegroom's blood stowed away in my right-hand pocket, and the bride's in my left." The soldier listened to this without letting a single word escape him. Then the warlock began boasting again. "Whatever I wish," says he, "that I can do." "I suppose it's quite impossible to get the better of you," says the soldier. "Why impossible? If anyone were to make a pyre of aspen boughs, 100 loads of them, and were to burn me on that pyre, then he'd be able to get the better of me. Only he'd have to look out sharp in burning me, for snakes and worms and different kinds of reptiles would creep out of my inside, and crows and magpies and jackdaws would come flying up. All these must be caught and flung on the pyre. If so much as a single maggot were to escape, then there'd be no help for it. In that maggot I should slip away." The soldier listened to all this and did not forget it. He and the warlock talked and talked, and at last they arrived at the grave. "Well, brother," said the warlock, "now I'll tear you to pieces, otherwise you'd be telling all this." "What are you talking about? Don't you deceive yourself. I serve God and the Emperor." The warlock gnashed his teeth, howled aloud, and sprang at the soldier, who drew his sword and began laying about him with sweeping blows. They struggled and struggled. The soldier was all but at the end of his strength. "Ah," thinks he, "I'm a lost man, and all for nothing." Suddenly the cocks began to crow. The warlock fell lifeless to the ground. The soldier took the phials of blood out of the warlock's pockets and went on to the house of his own people. When he had got there and had exchanged greetings with his relatives, they said, "Did you see any disturbance, soldier?" "No, I saw none. There now. Why, we've a terrible piece of work going on in the village. A warlock has taken to haunting it." After talking a while, they lay down to sleep. Next morning the soldier awoke and began asking, "I'm told you've got a wedding going on somewhere here?" "There was a wedding in the house of a rich moujik," replied his relatives, "but the bride and bridegroom have died this very night." "What from? Nobody knows." "Where does this moujik live?" They showed him the house. Thither he went without speaking a word. When he got there, he found the whole family in tears. "What are you mourning about?" says he. "Such and such is the state of things, soldier," say they. "I can bring your young people to life again." "What will you give me if I do?" "Take what you like, even were it half of what we've got." The soldier did as the warlock had instructed him, and brought the young people back to life. Instead of weeping, there began to be happiness and rejoicing. The soldier was hospitably treated and well rewarded. Then, left about, face. Off he marched to the starosta, and told him to call the peasants together, and to get ready 100 loads of aspen wood. Well, they took the wood into the graveyard, dragged the warlock out of his grave, placed him on the pyre, and set it alight, the people all standing round in a circle with brooms, shovels, and fire-irons. The pyre became wrapped in flames, the warlock began to burn. His corpse burst, and out of it crept snakes, worms, and all sorts of reptiles, and up came flying crows, magpies, and jackdaws. The peasants knocked them down and flung them into the fire, not allowing so much as a single maggot to creep away. And so the warlock was thoroughly consumed, and the soldier collected his ashes and strewed them to the winds. From that time forth, there was peace in the village. The soldier received the thanks of the whole community. He stayed at home some time, enjoying himself thoroughly. Then he went back to the Tsar's service with money in his pocket. When he had served his time, he retired from the army and began to live at his ease. The stories of this class are very numerous, all of them based on the same belief that in certain cases the dead, in a material shape, leave their graves in order to destroy and prey upon the living. This belief is not peculiar to the Slavonians, but it is one of the characteristic features of their spiritual creed. Among races which burn their dead, remarks Hertz in his exhaustive treatise on the werewolf, P. Little is known of regular corpse spectres. Only vague apparitions, dream-like phantoms, are supposed, as a general rule, to issue from graves in which nothing more substantial than ashes has been laid. But where it is customary to lay the dead body in the ground, a peculiar half-life becomes attributed to it by popular fancy, and by some races it is supposed to be actuated at intervals by murderous impulses. In the East, these are generally attributed to the fact of its being possessed by an evil spirit. But in some parts of Europe, no such explanation of its conduct is given, though it may often be implied. The belief in vampires is the specific Slavonian form of the universal belief in spectres, Gespenster, says Hertz. And certainly vampirism has always made those lands peculiarly its own, which are or have been tenanted or greatly influenced by Slavonians. But animated corpses often play an important part in the traditions of other countries. Among the Scandinavians, and especially in Iceland, were they the cause of many fears, though they were not supposed to be impelled by a thirst for blood so much as by other carnal appetites, or by a kind of local malignity. In Germany, tales of horror similar to the Icelandic are by no means unknown, but the majority of them are to be found in districts which were once wholly Lettic or Slavonic, though they are now reckoned as Teutonic, such as East Prussia or Pomerania or Lusatia. But it is among the races which are Slavonic by tongue as well as by descent that the genuine vampire tales flourish most luxuriantly in Russia, in Poland, and in Serbia among the Czechs of Bohemia and the Slovaks of Hungary, and the numerous other subdivisions of the Slavonic family which are included within the heterogeneous empire of Austria. Among the Albanians and modern Greeks, they have taken firm root, but on those peoples a strong Slavonic influence has been brought to bear, even Troff. Bernhard Schmidt, although an uncompromising opponent of Folmera's doctrines with regard to the Slavonic origin of the present inhabitants of Greece, allows that the Greeks, as they borrowed from the Slavonians a name for the vampire, may have received from them also certain views and customs with respect to it. Beyond this he will not go, and he quotes a number of passages from Hellenic writers to prove that in ancient Greece spectres were frequently represented as delighting in blood, and sometimes as exercising a power to destroy. Nor will he admit that any very great stress ought to be laid upon the fact that the vampire is generally called in Greece by a name of Slavonic extraction. For in the islands, which were, he says, little if at all affected by Slavonic influences, the vampire bears a thoroughly Hellenic designation. But the thirst for blood attributed by Homer to his shadowy ghosts seems to have been of a different nature from that evinced by the material vampire of modern days. Nor does that ghastly revenant seem by any means fully to correspond to such ghostly destroyers as the spirit of Gello, or the spectres of Medea's slaughtered children. It is not only in the vampire, however, that we find a point of close contact between the popular beliefs of the New Greeks and the Slavonians. Profia, Bernhard Schmidt's excellent work, is full of examples which prove how intimately they are connected. The districts of the Russian Empire in which a belief in vampires mostly prevails are White Russia and the Ukraine. But the ghastly bloodsucker, the Upir, whose name has become naturalized in so many alien lands under forms resembling our vampire, disturbs the peasant mind in many other parts of Russia, though not perhaps with the same intense fear which it spreads among the inhabitants of the above-named districts or of some other Slavonic lands. The numerous traditions which have gathered around the original idea vary to some extent according to their locality, but they are never radically inconsistent. Some of the details are curious. The Little Russians hold that if a vampire's hands have grown numb from remaining long crossed in the grave, he makes use of his teeth, which are like steel. When he has gnawed his way with these through all obstacles, he first destroys the babes he finds in a house, and then the older inmates. If fine salt be scattered on the floor of a room, the vampire's footsteps may be traced to his grave, in which he will be found resting with rosy cheek and gory mouth. The Kashubis say that when a Vietsky, as they call the vampire, wakes from his sleep within the grave. He begins to gnaw his hands and feet, and as he gnaws, one after another, first his relations, then his other neighbors, sicken and die. When he has finished his own store of flesh, he rises at midnight and destroys cattle, or climbs a belfry and sounds the bell. All who hear the ill-omened tones will soon die. But generally he sucks the blood of sleepers. Those on whom he has operated will be found next morning dead, with a very small wound on the left side of the breast, exactly over the heart. The Lusatian Wends hold that when a corpse chews its shroud or sucks its own breast, all its kin will soon follow it to the grave. The Wallachians say that a Murani, a sort of cross between a werewolf and a vampire, connected by name with our nightmare, can take the form of a dog, a cat, or a toad, and also of any blood-sucking insect. When he is exhumed, he is found to have long nails of recent growth on his hands and feet, and blood is streaming from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. The Russian stories give a very clear account of the operation performed by the vampire on his victims. Thus, one night, a peasant is conducted by a stranger into a house where lie two sleepers, an old man and a youth. The stranger takes a pail, places it near the youth, and strikes him on the back. Immediately the back opens, and forth flows rosy blood. The stranger fills the pail full and drinks it dry. Then he fills another pail with blood from the old man, slakes his brutal thirst, and says to the peasant, "It begins to grow light. Let us go back to my dwelling." Many skazkas also contain, as we have already seen, very clear directions how to deprive a vampire of his baleful power. According to them, as well as to their parallels elsewhere, a stake must be driven through the murderous corpse. In Russia, an aspen stake is selected for that purpose, but in some places one made of thorn is preferred. But a Bohemian vampire, when staked in this manner in the ear, says Manhart, merely exclaimed that the stick would be very useful for keeping off dogs, and a Strigon, or Istrian vampire, who was transfixed with a sharp thorn cudgel near Laibach Inn, pulled it out of his body and flung it back contemptuously. The only certain methods of destroying a vampire appear to be either to consume him by fire or to chop off his head with a grave-digger's shovel. The Wends say that if a vampire is hit over the back of the head with an implement of that kind, he will squeal like a pig. The origin of the vampire is hidden in obscurity. In modern times, it has generally been a wizard, or a witch, or a suicide, or a person who has come to a violent end, or who has been cursed by the church or by his parents. Who takes such an unpleasant means of recalling himself to the memory of his surviving relatives and acquaintances? But even the most honorable dead may become vampires by accident. He whom a vampire has slain is supposed, in some countries, himself to become a vampire. The leaping of a cat or some other animal across a corpse, even the flight of a bird above it, may turn the innocent defunct into a ravenous demon. Sometimes, moreover, a man is destined from his birth to be a vampire, being the offspring of some unholy union. In some instances, the evil one himself is the father of such a doomed victim, in others, a temporarily animated corpse. But whatever may be the cause of a corpse's vampirism, it is generally agreed that it will give its neighbors no rest until they have at least transfixed it. What is very remarkable about the operation is that the stake must be driven through the vampire's body by a single blow. A second would restore it to life. This idea accounts for the otherwise unexplained fact that the heroes of folk tales are frequently warned that they must on no account be tempted into striking their magic foes more than one stroke. Whatever voices may cry aloud, "Strike again!" they must remain contented with a single blow. Elijah. The Prophet and Nicholas. A long while ago there lived a moujik. Nicholas's day he always kept holy, but Elijah's not a bit. He would even work upon it. In honor of Saint Nicholas, he would have a taper lighted and a service performed, but about Elijah the prophet he forgot so much as to think. Well, it happened one day that Elijah and Nicholas were walking over the land belonging to this moujik, and as they walked, they looked in the cornfields. The green blades were growing up so splendidly that it did one's heart good to look at them. "Here'll be a good harvest." "A right good harvest," says Nicholas, "and the moujik too is a good fellow sure enough, both honest and pious, one who remembers God and thinks about the saints. It will fall into good hands." "We'll see by and by whether much will fall to his share," answered Elijah, "when I've burnt up all his land with lightning and beaten it all flat with hail. Then this moujik of yours will know what's right, and will learn to keep Elijah's day holy." Well, they wrangled and wrangled, then they parted asunder. St. Nicholas went off straight to the moujik and said, "Sell all your corn at once, just as it stands, to the priest of Elijah. If you don't, nothing will be left of it. It will all be beaten flat by hail." Off rushed the moujik to the priest. "Won't your reverence buy some standing corn?" "I'll sell my whole crop. I'm in such pressing need of money just now. It's a case of pay up with me." "Buy it, father. I'll sell it cheap." They bargained and came to an agreement. The moujik got his money and went home. Some little time passed by. There gathered together, there came rolling up a storm cloud. With a terrible raining and hailing did it empty itself over the moujik's cornfields, cutting down all the crop as if with a knife. Not even a single blade did it leave standing. Next day Elijah and Nicholas walked past. Says Elijah, "Only see how I've devastated the moujik's cornfield." "The moujik's?" "No, brother. Devastated it you have splendidly. Only that field belongs to the Elijah priest, not to the moujik." "To the priest? How's that?" "Why, this way. The moujik sold it last week to the Elijah priest and got all the money for it. And so, methinks, the priest may whistle for his money." "Stop a bit," said Elijah. "I'll set the field all right again. It shall be twice as good as it was before." They finished talking, and went each his own way. St. Nicholas returned to the moujik and said, "Go to the priest and buy back your crop. You won't lose anything by it." The moujik went to the priest, made his bow, and said, "I see. Your reverence, God has sent you a misfortune. The hail has beaten the whole field so flat you might roll a ball over it. Since things are so, let's go halves in the loss. I'll take my field back, and here's half of your money for you to relieve your distress." The priest was rejoiced, and they immediately struck hands on the bargain. Meanwhile, goodness knows how the moujik's ground began to get all right. From the old roots shot forth new tender stems. Rain clouds came sailing exactly over the cornfield and gave the soil to drink. There sprang up a marvellous crop, tall and thick. As to weeds, there positively was not one to be seen, and the ears grew fuller and fuller till they were fairly bent right down to the ground. Then the dear sun glowed, and the rye grew ripe. Like so much gold did it stand in the fields. Many a sheaf did the moujik gather, many a heap of sheaves did he set up. And now he was beginning to carry the crop, and to gather it together into ricks. At that very time Elijah and Nicholas came walking by again. Joyfully did the prophet gaze on all the land, and say, "Only look, Nicholas, what a blessing! Why, I have rewarded the priest in such wise that he will never forget it all his life." The priest, "No, brother, the blessing indeed is great, but this land, you see, belongs to the moujik. The priest hasn't got anything whatsoever to do with it. What are you talking about? It's perfectly true. When the hail beat all the cornfield flat, the moujik went to the priest and bought it back again at half price. Stop a bit, says Elijah. I'll take the profit out of the corn. However many sheaves the moujik may lay on the threshing floor, he shall never thresh out of them more than a peck at a time. A bad piece of work, thinks Saint Nicholas. Off he went at once to the moujik. Mind, says he, when you begin threshing your corn, never put more than one sheaf at a time on the threshing floor. The moujik began to thresh. From every sheaf he got a peck of grain. All his bins, all his storehouses he crammed with rye, but still much remained over. So he built himself new barns and filled them as full as they could hold. Well, one day Elijah and Nicholas came walking past his homestead, and the prophet began looking here and there and said, Do you see what barns he's built? Has he got anything to put into them? They're quite full already, answers Nicholas. Why? Wherever did the moujik get such a lot of grain? Bless me. Why, every one of his sheaves gave him a peck of grain. When he began to thresh, he never put more than one sheaf at a time on the threshing floor. Ah, brother Nicholas, said Elijah, guessing the truth. It's you who go and tell the moujik everything. What an idea! That I should go and tell. As you please, that's your doing. But that moujik shan't forget me in a hurry. Why, what are you going to do to him? What I shall do, that I won't tell you, replies Elijah. There's a great danger coming, thinks St. Nicholas, and he goes to the moujik again and says, Buy 2 tapers, a big one and a little one, and do thus and thus with them. Well, next day the prophet Elijah and St. Nicholas were walking along together in the guise of wayfarers, and they met the moujik, who was carrying 2 wax tapers, one a big rouble one, and the other a tiny kopeck one. Where are you going, moujik? asked St. Nicholas. Well, I'm going to offer a rouble taper to Prophet Elijah. He's been ever so good to me. When my crops were ruined by the hail, he bestirred himself like anything, and gave me a plentiful harvest, twice as good as the other would have been. And the kopeck taper, what's that for? Why, that's for Nicholas, said the peasant, and passed on. There now, Elijah, says Nicholas, you say I go and tell everything to the moujik. Surely you can see for yourself how much truth there is in that? Thereupon the matter ended. Elijah was appeased and didn't threaten to hurt the moujik any more. And the moujik led a prosperous life, and from that time forward he held in equal honor Elijah's day and Nicholas's day. It is not always to the prophet Ilya that the power once attributed to Perun is now ascribed. The pagan wielder of the thunderbolt is represented in modern traditions by more than one Christian saint. Sometimes, as St. George, he transfixes monsters with his lance. Sometimes, as St. Andrew, he smites with his mace a spot given over to witchcraft. There was a village, says one of the legends of the Chernigov government, in which lived more than 1,000 witches, and they used to steal the holy stars, until at last there was not one left to light our sinful world. Then God sent the holy Andrew, who struck with his mace, and all that village was swallowed up by the earth, and the place thereof became a swamp. About St. George many stories are told, and still more ballads, if we may be allowed to call them so, are sung, under the names of Georgy, Yori, and Yegory the Brave. He is celebrated as a patron, as well of wolves as of flocks and herds, as a Christian confessor struggling and suffering for the faith amid pagan foes, and as a chivalrous destroyer of snakes and dragons. The discrepancies which exist between the various representations given of his character and his functions are very glaring, but they may be explained by the fact that a number of legendary ideas sprung from separate sources have become associated with his name, so that in one story his actions are in keeping with the character of an old Slavonian deity, in another with that of a Christian or a Buddhist saint. In some parts of Russia, when the cattle go out for the first time to the spring pastures, a pie, made in the form of a sheep, is cut up by the chief herdsman, and the fragments are preserved as a remedy against the diseases to which sheep are liable. On St. George's Day in spring, April, the fields are sanctified by a church service, at the end of which they are sprinkled with holy water. In the Tula government, a similar service is held over the wells. On the same day, in some parts of Russia, a youth who is called by the Slovenes the Green Yegori is dressed like our own Jack in the Green, with foliage and flowers. Holding a lighted torch in one hand and a pie in the other, he goes out to the cornfields, followed by girls singing appropriate songs. A circle of brushwood is then lighted, in the center of which is set the pie. All who take part in the ceremony then sit down around the fire, and eventually the pie is divided among them. Numerous legends speak of the strange connection which exists between St. George and the wolf. In Little Russia, that animal is called Saint, George's dog, and the carcasses of sheep which wolves have killed are not used for human food, it being held that they have been assigned by divine command to the beasts of the field. The human victim whom St. George has doomed to be thus destroyed, nothing can save. A man, to whom such a fate had been allotted, tried to escape from his assailants by hiding behind a stove, but a wolf transformed itself into a cat, and at midnight, when all was still, it stole into the house and seized the appointed prey. A hunter, who had been similarly doomed, went on killing wolves for some time, and hanging up their skins. But when the fatal hour arrived, one of the skins became a wolf, and slew him, by whom it had before been slain. In Little Russia, the wolves have their own herdsman, a being like unto a man, who is often seen in company with St. George. There were two brothers, says a popular tale, the one rich, the other poor. The poor brother had climbed up a tree one night, and suddenly he saw beneath him what seemed to be two men, the one driving a pack of wolves, the other attending to the conveyance of a quantity of bread. These two beings were St. George and the Lisun, and St. George distributed the bread among the wolves, and one loaf which remained over he gave to the poor brother, who afterwards found that it was of a miraculous nature, always renewing itself, and so supplying its owner with an inexhaustible store of bread. The rich brother, hearing the story, climbed up the tree one night in hopes of obtaining a similar present. But that night St. George found that he had no bread to give to one of his wolves, so he gave it the rich brother instead. One of the legends attributes strange forgetfulness on one occasion to St. George. A certain gypsy, who had a wife and 7 children, and nothing to feed them with, was standing by a roadside, lost in reflection, when Yegori the Brave came riding by. Hearing that the saint was on his way to heaven, the gypsy besought him to ask of God how he was to support his family. St. George promised to do so, but forgot. Again the gypsy saw him riding past, and again the saint promised and forgot. In a third interview, the gypsy asked him to leave behind his golden stirrup as a pledge. A third time Saint George leaves the presence of the Lord without remembering the commission with which he has been entrusted. But when he is about to mount his charger, the sight of the solitary stirrup recalls it to his mind. So he returns and states the gypsy's request, and obtains the reply that the gypsy's business is to cheat and to swear falsely. As soon as the gypsy is told this, he thanks the saint and goes off home. "Where are you going?" cries Yegori. "Give me back my golden stirrup." "What stirrup?" asks the gypsy. "Why, the one you took from me." "When did I take one from you?" I see you now for the first time in my life, and never a stirrup did I ever take, so help me heaven." So Yeggeri had to go away without getting his stirrup back. There is an interesting Bulgarian legend in which St. George appears in his Christian capacity of dragon slayer, but surrounded by personages belonging to heathen mythology. The inhabitants of the pagan city of Troyan, it states, did not believe in Christ, but in gold and silver. Now, there were 70 conduits in that city which supplied it with spring water, and the Lord made these conduits run with liquid gold and silver instead of water, so that all the people had as much as they pleased of the metals they worshipped, but they had nothing to drink. After a time, the Lord took pity upon them, and there appeared, at a little distance from the city, a deep lake. To this they used to go for water, only the lake was guarded by a terrible monster, which daily devoured a maiden, whom the inhabitants of Troyan were obliged to give to it in return for leave to make use of the lake. This went on for 3 years, at the end of which time it fell to the lot of the king's daughter to be sacrificed by the monster. But when the Trojan Andromeda was exposed on the shore of the lake, a Perseus arrived to save her in the form of St. George. While waiting for the monster to appear, the saint laid his head on her knees, and she dressed his locks. Then he fell into so deep a slumber that the monster drew nigh without awaking him. But the princess began to weep bitterly, and her scalding tears fell on the face of St. George and awoke him, and he slew the monster, and afterwards converted all the inhabitants of Troyan to Christianity. Saints Nicholas generally maintains in the legends the kindly character attributed to him in the story in which he and the prophet Ilya are introduced together. It is to him that at the present day the anxious peasant turns most readily for help, and it is he whom the legends represent as being the most prompt of all the heavenly host to assist the unfortunate among mankind. Thus, in one of the stories, a peasant is driving along a heavy road one autumn day when his cart sticks fast in the mire. Just then St. Cassian comes by. "Help me, brother, to get my cart out of the mud," says the peasant. "Get along with you," replies St. Cassian. "Do you suppose I've got leisure to be dawdling here with you?" Presently St. Nicholas comes that way. The peasant addresses the same request to him, and he stops and gives the required assistance. When the two saints arrive in heaven, the Lord asks them where they have been. "I have been on the earth," replies St. Cassian, "and I happened to pass by a moujik whose cart had stuck in the mud. He cried out to me, saying, 'Help me to get my cart out,' but I was not going to spoil my heavenly apparel." "I have been on the earth," says St. Nicholas, whose clothes were all covered with mud. "I went along that same road, and I helped the moujik to get his cart free." Then the Lord says, "Listen, Cassian, because thou didst not assist the moujik. Therefore shall men honor thee by thanksgiving once only every 4 years. But to thee, Nicholas, because thou didst assist the moujik to set free his cart, shall men twice every year offer up thanksgiving." Ever since that time, says the story, it has been customary to offer prayers and thanksgiving, molebnui, to Nicholas twice a year, but to Cassian only once every leap year. In another story, Saint Nicholas comes to the aid of an adventurer who watches beside the coffin of a bewitched princess. There were 2 moujiks in a certain village, we are told, one of whom was very rich and the other very poor. One day the poor man, who was in great distress, went to the house of the rich man and begged for a loan. "I will repay it on my word." "Here is Nicholas as a surety," he cried, pointing to a picture of Saint Nicholas. Thereupon the rich man lent him 20 roubles. The day for repayment came, but the poor man had not a single kopeck. Furious at his loss, the rich man rushed to the picture of St. Nicholas, crying, "Why don't you pay up for that pauper? You stood surety for him, didn't you?" And as the picture made no reply, he tore it down from the wall, set it on a cart, and drove it away, flogging it as he went, and crying, "Pay me my money! Pay me my money!" As he drove past the inn, a young merchant saw him and cried, "What are you doing, you infidel?" The moujik explained that as he could not get his money back from a man who was in his debt, he was proceeding against a surety, whereupon the merchant paid the debt, and thereby ransomed the picture, which he hung up in a place of honor and kept a lamp burning before it. Soon afterwards, an old man offered his services to the merchant, who appointed him his manager, and from that time all things went well with the merchant. But after a while a misfortune befell the land in which he lived, for an evil witch enchanted the king's daughter, who lay dead all day long, but at night got up and ate people. So she was shut up in a coffin and placed in a church, and her hand, with half the kingdom as her dowry, was offered to anyone who could disenchant her. The merchant, in accordance with his old manager's instructions, undertook the task, and after a series of adventures succeeded in accomplishing it. The last words of one of the narrators of the story are, "Now this old one was no mere man. He was Nicholas himself, the saint of God." With one more legend about this favorite saint, I will conclude this section of the present chapter. In some of its incidents, it closely resembles the story of the Smith and the Demon, which was quoted in the first chapter. The priest with the greedy eyes. In the parish of St. Nicholas there lived a pope. This pope's eyes were thoroughly pope-like. He served Nicholas several years, and went on serving until such time as there remained to him nothing either for board or lodging. Then our Pope collected all the church keys, looked at the picture of Nicholas, thumped him out of spite over the shoulders with the keys, and went forth from his parish as his eyes led him. And as he walked along the road, he suddenly lighted upon an unknown man. "Hail, good man," said the stranger to the Pope. "Whence do you come, and whither are you going? Take me with you as a companion." Well, they went on together. They walked and walked for several versts. Then they grew tired. It was time to seek repose. Now the Pope had a few biscuits in his cassock, and the companion he had picked up had a couple of small loaves. "Let's eat your loaves first," says the Pope, "and afterwards we'll take to the biscuits too." "Agreed," replies the stranger. "We'll eat my loaves and keep your biscuits for afterwards." Well, they ate away at the loaves. Each of them ate his fill, but the loaves got no smaller. The Pope grew envious. "Come," thinks he, "I'll steal them from him." After the meal the old man lay down to take a nap, but the Pope kept scheming how to steal the loaves from him. The old man went to sleep. The Pope drew the loaves out of his pocket and began quietly nibbling them at his seat. The old man awoke and felt for his loaves. They were gone. "Where are my loaves?" he exclaimed. "Who has eaten them? Was it you, Pope?" "No, not I, on my word," replied the Pope. "Well, so be it," said the old man. They gave themselves a shake and set out again on their journey. They walked and walked. Suddenly the road branched off in two different directions. Well, they both went the same way, and soon reached a certain country. In that country the king's daughter lay at the point of death, and the king had given notice that to him who should cure his daughter he would give half of his kingdom and half of his goods and possessions, but if anyone undertook to cure her and failed, he should have his head chopped off and hung up on a stake. Well, they arrived, elbowed their way among the people in front of the king's palace, and gave out that they were doctors. The servant came out from the king's palace and began questioning them. "Who are you? From what cities? "Of what families? What do you want?" "We are doctors," they replied. "We can cure the princess." "Oh, if you are doctors, come into the palace." So they went into the palace, saw the princess, and asked the king to supply them with a private apartment, a tub of water, a sharp sword, and a big table. The king supplied them with all these things. Then they shut themselves up in the private apartment, laid the princess on the big table, cut her into small pieces with a sharp sword, flung them into the tub of water, washed them and rinsed them. Afterwards they began putting the pieces together. When the old man breathed on them, the different pieces stuck together. When he had put all the pieces together properly, he gave them a final puff of breath. The princess began to quiver, and then arose alive and well. The king came in person to the door of their room, and cried, "In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, Amen," they replied. "Have you cured the princess?" asked the king. "We've cured her," say the doctors. "Here she is." Out went the princess to the king, alive and well. Says the king to the doctors, "What sort of valuables will you have? Would you like gold or silver? Take whatever you please." Well, they began taking gold and silver. The old man used only a thumb and 2 fingers, but the Pope seized whole handfuls and kept on stowing them away in his wallet, shoveling them into it, and then lifting it a bit to see if he was strong enough to carry it. At last they took their leave of the king and went their way. The old man said to the Pope, "We'll bury this money in the ground and go and make another cure." Well, they walked and walked, and at length they reached another country. In that country also the king had a daughter at the point of death, and he had given notice that whoever cured his daughter should have half of his kingdom and of his goods and possessions. But if he failed to cure her, he should have his head chopped off and hung up on a stake. Then the evil one afflicted the envious Pope, suggesting to him, why shouldn't he go and perform the cure by himself without saying a word to the old man, and so lay hold of all the gold and silver for himself? So the Pope walked about in front of the royal gates, forced himself on the notice of the people there, and gave out that he was a doctor. In the same way as before, he asked the king for a private room, a tub of water, a large table, and a sharp sword. Shutting himself up in the private room, he laid the princess on the table and began chopping her up with the sharp sword, and however much the princess might scream or squeal, the Pope, without paying any attention to either screaming or squealing, went on chopping and chopping, just as if she had been so much beef. And when he had chopped her up into little pieces, he threw them into the tub, washed them, rinsed them, and then put them together bit by bit, exactly as the old man had done, expecting to see all the pieces unite with each other. He breathes on them, but nothing happens. He gives another puff worse than ever. See, the Pope flings the pieces back again into the water, washes and washes, rinses and rinses, and again puts them together bit by bit. Again he breathes on them, but still nothing comes of it. "Woe is me," thinks the Pope. "Here's a mess." Next morning the king arrives and looks. The doctor has had no success at all. He's only messed the dead body all over with muck. The king ordered the doctor off to the gallows. Then our Pope besought him, crying, "O king, O free to do thy will, spare me for a little time. I will run for the old man. He will cure the princess." The Pope ran off in search of the old man. He found the old man and cried, "Old man, I am guilty wretch that I am. The devil got hold of me. I wanted to cure the king's daughter all by myself, but I couldn't. Now they're going to hang me. Do help me." The old man returned with the Pope. The Pope was taken to the gallows. Says the old man to the Pope, Pope who ate my loaves. Not I, on my word, so help me heaven, not I. The Pope was hoisted on to the second step. Says the old man to the Pope, Pope who ate my loaves. Not I, on my word, so help me heaven, not I. He mounted the third step, and again it was, not I. And now his head was actually in the noose, but it's not I, all the same. Well, there was nothing to be done, says the old man to the king. O king, O free to do thy will, permit me to cure the princess, and if I do not cure her, order another noose to be got ready, a noose for me, and a noose for the Pope. Well, the old man put the pieces of the princess's body together, bit by bit, and breathed on them, and the princess stood up alive and well. The king recompensed them both with silver and gold. Let's go and divide the money, Pope, said the old man. So they went. They divided the money into 3 heaps. The Pope looked at them and said, How's this? There's only 2 of us. For whom is this 3rd share? That, says the old man, is for him who ate my loaves. I ate them, old man, cries the Pope. I did really, so help me heaven. Then the money is yours, says the old man. Take my share too. And now go and serve in your parish faithfully. Don't be greedy, and don't go hitting Nicholas over the shoulders with the keys. Thus spake the old man, and straightway disappeared. The principal motive of this story is, of course, the same as that of the smith and the demon. In number, see above, p. A miraculous cure is effected by a supernatural being. A man attempts to do likewise, but fails. When about to undergo the penalty of his failure, he is saved by that being, who reads him a moral lesson. In the original form of the tale, the supernatural agent was probably a demigod, whom a vague Christian influence has in one instance degraded into the devil, in another canonized as Saint Nicholas. The Medea's Cauldron episode occurs in very many folk tales, such as the German Bruderlustig, Grimm, No, and Des Junge Geluete. Mayenlein, Grimm, No, in the latter of which our Lord, accompanied by St. Peter, spends a night in a smith's house and makes an old beggar man young by first placing him in the fire and then plunging him into water. After the departure of his visitors, the smith tries a similar experiment on his mother-in-law, but quite unsuccessfully. In the corresponding Norse tale of the Master Smith, Asbjörnsen and Mo. No. Descent? No. An old beggar woman is the victim of the smith's unsuccessful experiment. In another Norse tale, that of Peik, Asbjörnsen's new series, No. P. A king is induced to kill his wife and his daughter in the mistaken belief that he will be able to restore them to life. In one of the stories of the Dasakumaracharita, a king is persuaded to jump into a certain lake in the hope of obtaining a new and improved body. He is then killed by his insidious adviser, who usurps his throne, pretending to be the renovated monarch. In another story in the same collection, a king believes that his wife will be able to confer on him by her magic skill, a most celestial figure, and under that impression confides to her all his secrets, after which she brings about his death. See Wilson's Essays, II and C and C. Jacob's Hindu Tales, pp. 2. About demons. From the stories which have already been quoted, some idea may be gained of the part which evil spirits play in Russian popular fiction. In one of them, No, figures the ghoul which feeds on the dead. In several, Nos, we see the fiend-haunted corpse hungering after human flesh and blood. The history of the bad wife. No, proves how a demon may suffer at a woman's hands. That of the dead witch. No, shows to what indignities the remains of a wicked woman may be subjected by the fiends with whom she has chosen to associate. In the awful drunkard? No. And the fiddler in hell? No. The abode of evil spirits is portrayed, and some light is thrown on their manners and customs, and in the smith and the demon? No. The portrait of one of their number is drawn in no unkindly spirit. The difference which exists between the sketches of fiends contained in these stories is clearly marked, so much so that it would of itself be sufficient to prove that there is no slight confusion of ideas in the minds of the Russian peasants with regard to the demoniacal beings whom they generally call chorti, or devils. Still more clearly is the contrast between those ideas brought out by the other stories, many in number, into which those powers of darkness enter. It is evident that the traditions from which the popular conception of the ghostly enemy has been evolved must have been of a complex and even conflicting character. Of very heterogeneous elements must have been composed the form under which the popular fancy, in Russia as well as in other lands, has embodied the abstract idea of evil. The diabolical characters in the Russian tales and legends are constantly changing the proportions of their figures, the nature of their attributes. In one story, they seem to belong to the great and widely subdivided family of Indian demons. In another, they appear to be akin to certain fiends of Turanian extraction. In a third, they display features which may have been inherited from the forgotten deities of old Slavonic mythology. In all the stories which belong to the legendary class, they bear manifest signs of having been subjected to Christian influences, the effect of which has been insufficient to do more than slightly to disguise their heathenism. The old gods of the Slavonians have passed away and left behind but scanty traces of their existence. But still, in the traditions and proverbial expressions of the peasants in various Slavonic lands, there may be recognized some relics of the older faith. Among these are a few referring to a white and to a black god. Thus, among the peasants of White Russia, some vague memory still exists of a white or bright being, now called Baelun, who leads belated travellers out of forests and bestows gold on men who do him good service. Dark is it in the forest without Baelun, is one phrase, and another, spoken of a man on whom fortune has smiled, is, he must have made friends with Baelun. On the other hand, the memory of the black or evil god is preserved in such imprecations as the Ukraine, "May the black god smite thee." To ancient pagan traditions, also, into which a Christian element has entered, may be assigned the popular belief that infants which have been cursed by their mothers before their birth, or which are suffocated during their sleep, or which die from any causes unchristened or christened by a drunken priest, become the prey of demons. This idea has given rise in Russia, as well as elsewhere, to a large group of stories. The Russian peasants believe, it is said, that in order to rescue from the fiends the soul of a babe which has been suffocated in its sleep, its mother must spend 3 nights in a church, standing within a circle traced by the hand of a priest. When the cocks crow on the 3rd morning, the demons will give her back her dead child. Great stress is laid in the skazkas and legends upon the terrible power of a parent's curse. The hasty word of a father or a mother will condemn even an innocent child to slavery among devils, and when it has once been uttered, it is irrevocable. It might have been supposed that the fearful efficacy of such an imprecation would have silenced bad language, as that of the vril rendered war impossible among the vrilya of the coming race, Tao. But that such was not the case is proved by the number of narratives which turn on uncalled-for parental cursing. Here is an abridgment of one of these stories, There was an old man who lived near Lake Onega, and who supported himself and his wife by hunting. One day, when he was engaged in the pursuit of game, a well-dressed man met him and said, "Sell me that dog of yours, and come for your money to the Mian mountain tomorrow evening." The old man sold him the dog, and went next day to the top of the mountain, where he found a great city inhabited by devils. There he soon found the house of his debtor, who provided him with a banquet and a bath. And in the bathroom he was served by a young man who, when the bath was over, fell at his feet, saying, "Don't accept money for your dog, grandfather, but ask for me." The old man consented. "Give me that good youth," said he. "He shall serve instead of a son to me." There was no help for it. They had to give him the youth. And when the old man had returned home, the youth told him to go to Novgorod, there to inquire for a merchant, and ask him whether he had any children. He did so, and the merchant replied, "I had an only son." But his mother cursed him in a passion, crying, "The devil take thee!" And so the devil carried him off. It turned out that the youth whom the old man had saved from the devils was that merchant's son. Thereupon the merchant rejoiced greatly, and took the old man and his wife to live with him in his house. And here is another tale of the same kind from the Vladimir government. Once upon a time there was an old couple, and they had an only son. His mother had cursed him before he was born, but he grew up and married. Soon afterwards he suddenly disappeared. His parents did all they could to trace him, but their attempts were in vain. Now there was a hut in the forest not far off, and thither it chanced that an old beggar came one night, and lay down to rest on the stove. Before he had been there long, someone rode up to the door of the hut, got off his horse, entered the hut, and remained there all night, muttering incessantly, "May the Lord judge my mother, in that she cursed me, while a babe unborn." Next morning the beggar went to the house of the old couple, and told them all that had occurred. So, towards evening, the old man went to the hut in the forest, and hid himself behind the stove. Presently the horseman arrived, entered the hut, and began to repeat the words which the beggar had overheard. The old man recognized his son, and came forth to greet him, crying, "Oh, my dear son! At last I have found thee. Never again will I let thee go." "Follow me," replied his son, who mounted his horse and rode away, his father following him on foot. Presently they came to a river which was frozen over, and in the ice was a hole. And the youth rode straight into that hole, and in it both he and his horse disappeared. The old man lingered long beside the ice hole. Then he returned home and said to his wife, "I have found our son, but it will be hard to get him back. Why, he lives in the water." Next night the youth's mother went to the hut, but she succeeded no better than her husband had done. So on the third night his young wife went to the hut and hid behind the stove, and when she heard the horseman enter she sprang forth, exclaiming, "My darling dear, my lifelong spouse, now will I never part from thee." "Follow me," replied her husband. And when they came to the edge of the ice hole, "If thou goest into the water, then will I follow after thee," cried she. "If so, take off thy cross." He replied. She took off her cross, leaped into the ice hole, and found herself in a vast hall. In it Satan was seated, and when he saw her arrive, he asked her husband whom he had brought with him. "This is my wife," replied the youth. "Well then, if she is thy wife, get thee gone, hence with her. Married folks must not be sundered." So the wife rescued her husband, and brought him back from the devils into the free light. Sometimes it is a victim's own imprudence, and not a parent's hasty word, which has placed him in the power of the evil one. There is a well-known story, which has spread far and wide over Europe, of a soldier who abstains for a term of years from washing, shaving, and hair-combing, and who serves, or at least obeys, the devil during that time, at the end of which he is rewarded by the fiend with great wealth. His appearance being against him, he has some difficulty in finding a wife, rich as he is. But after the elder sisters of a family have refused him, the youngest accepts him, whereupon he allows himself to be cleansed, combed, and dressed in bright apparel, and leads a cleanly and a happy life ever afterwards. In one of the German versions of this story, a king's elder daughter, when asked to marry her rich but slovenly suitor, replies, "I would sooner go into the deepest water than do that." In a Russian version, the unwashed soldier lends a large sum of money to an impoverished monarch who cannot pay his troops, and asks his royal creditor to give him one of his daughters in marriage by way of recompense. The king reflects. He is sorry for his daughters, but at the same time, he cannot do without the money. At last, he tells the soldier to get his portrait painted, and promises to show it to the princesses, and see if one of them will accept him. The soldier has his likeness taken, touch for touch, just exactly as he is, and the king shows it to his daughters. The eldest princess sees that the picture is that of a monster, with dishevelled hair and uncut nails and unwiped nose, and cries, "I won't have him! I'd sooner have the devil." Now the devil was standing behind her, pen and paper in hand. He heard what she said and booked her soul. When the second princess is asked whether she will marry the soldier, she exclaims, "No, indeed. I'd rather die an old maid. I'd sooner be linked with the devil than marry that man." When the devil heard that, he booked her soul too. But the youngest princess, the Cordelia of the family, when she is asked whether she will marry the man who has helped her father in his need, replies, "It's fated. I must, it seems. I'll marry him. And then God's will be done." While the preparations are being made for the marriage, the soldier arrives at the end of his term of service to the little devil, who had hired him, and from whom he had received his wealth in return for his abstinence and cleanliness. So he calls the little devil, and says, "Now turn me into a nice young man." Accordingly, the little devil cut him up into small pieces, threw them into a cauldron, and set them on to boil. When they were done enough, he took them out and put them together again, properly, bone to bone, joint to joint, vein to vein. Then he sprinkled them with the waters of life and death, and up jumped the soldier, a finer lad than stories can describe or pens portray. The story does not end here. When the little devil returns to the lake from which he came, the grandfather of the demons asks him, "How about the soldier?" "He has served his time honestly and honorably," is the reply. "Never once did he shave, have his hair cut, wipe his nose, or change his clothes." The grandfather flies into a passion. "What? In 15 whole years you couldn't entrap a soldier? What? All that money wasted for nothing? What sort of a devil do you call yourself after that?" And ordered him to be flung into boiling pitch. "Stop, grandfather," replies his grandchild. "I've booked 2 souls instead of the soldier's one." "How's that?" "Why, this way. The soldier wanted to marry one of 3 princesses, but the elder one and the second one told their father that they'd sooner marry the devil than the soldier. So you see, both of them are ours." After he had heard this explanation, the grandfather acknowledged that the little devil was in the right and ordered him to be set free. The imp, you see, understood his business. For 2 German versions of this story, see the tales of Des Tuffler's Russchiger Bruder and Der Bayernhauter, Grimm, Nose, and B.D. II. PP. More than 12 centuries ago, Hyo Sung transferred the following story from India to China. A certain rishi passed many times, 10,000 years, in a religious ecstasy. His body became like a withered tree. At last he emerged from his ecstasy and felt inclined to marry. So he went to a neighboring palace and asked the king to bestow upon him one of his daughters. The king, exceedingly embarrassed, called the princesses together and asked which of them would consent to accept the dreaded suitor, who, of course, had not paid the slightest attention to his toilette for hundreds of centuries. 99 of those ladies flatly refused to have anything to do with him, but the 100th, the last and youngest of the party, agreed to sacrifice herself for her father's sake. But when the rishi saw his bride, he was discontented, and when he heard that her elder and fairer sisters had all refused him, he pronounced a curse which made all 99 of them humpbacks, and so destroyed their chance of marrying at all. Stanislas Julien's Mémoires sur les contrées occidentales, i.e., PP, has the idea that a hasty word can place its utterer or its victim in the power of the evil one, not only after death, but also during this life, has given rise to numerous Russian legends, and as it still exists, to some extent, has a living faith in the minds of the Russian peasantry. It may be as well to quote at length one of the stories in which it is embodied. It would be recognized as a variant of the stories about the youth who visits the Water King and elopes with one of that monarch's daughters. The main difference between the legend we are about to quote and the skazkas which have already been quoted is that a devil of the satanic type is substituted in it for the mythical personage, whether Slavonic Neptune or Indian Rakshasa, who played a similar part in them. The Hasty Word. In a certain village there lived an old couple in great poverty, and they had one son. The son grew up, and the old woman began to say to the old man, "It's time for us to get our son married." "Well then, go and ask for a wife for him," said he. So she went to a neighbor to ask for his daughter for her son. The neighbor refused. She went to a second peasant's, but the second refused too to a third, but he showed her the door. She went round the whole village. Not a soul would grant her request. So she returned home and cried, "Well, old man, our lad's an unlucky fellow." "How so?" "I've trudged round to every house, but no one will give him his daughter." "That's a bad business," says the old man. "Summer will soon be coming, but we have no one to work for us here. Go to another village, old woman. Perhaps you will get a bride for him there." The old woman went to another village, visited every house from one end to the other, but there wasn't an atom of good to be got out of it. Wherever she thrusts herself, they always refuse. With what she left home, with that she returned home. "No," she says, "no one wants to become related to us poor beggars." "If that's the case," answers the old man, "there's no use in wearing out your legs. Jump up onto the polati." The son was sorely afflicted, and began to entreat his parents, saying, "My born father and my born mother, give me your blessing. I will go and seek my fate myself." "But where will you go?" "Where my eyes lead me." So they gave him their blessing and let him go whithersoever it pleased him. Well, the youth went out upon the highway, began to weep very bitterly, and said to himself as he walked, "Was I born into the world worse than all other men, that not a single girl is willing to marry me? Methinks, if the devil himself would give me a bride, I'd take even her." Suddenly, as if rising from the earth, there appeared before him a very old man. "Good day." "Good youth." "Good day, old man. What was that you were saying just now?" The youth was frightened and did not know what reply to make. "Don't be afraid of me. I shan't do you any harm. And moreover, perhaps I may get you out of your trouble. Speak boldly." The youth told him everything precisely. "Poor creature that I am, there isn't a single girl who will marry me. Well, as I went along, I became exceedingly wretched, and in my misery I said, if the devil offered me a bride, I'd take even her." The old man laughed and said, "Follow me. I'll let you choose a lovely bride for yourself." By and by they reached a lake. "Turn your back to the lake and walk backwards," said the old man. Scarcely had the youth had time to turn round and take a couple of steps, when he found himself under the water and in a white stone palace, all its rooms splendidly furnished, cunningly decorated. The old man gave him to eat and to drink. Afterwards he introduced 12 maidens, each one more beautiful than the other. "Choose whichever you like. Whichever you choose, her will I bestow upon you." "That's a puzzling job," said the youth. "Give me till tomorrow morning to think about it, grandfather." "Well, think away," said the old man, and led his guest to a private chamber. The youth lay down to sleep and thought, "Which one shall I choose?" Suddenly the door opened. A beautiful maiden entered. "Are you asleep or not, good youth?" says she. "No, fair maiden, I can't get to sleep, for I'm always thinking which bride to choose. That's the very reason I have come to give you counsel. You see, good youth, you've managed to become the devil's guest. Now listen. If you want to go on living in the white world, then do what I tell you. But if you don't follow my instructions, you'll never get out of here alive. Tell me what to do, fair maiden. I won't forget it all my life. Tomorrow the fiend will bring you 12 maidens, each one exactly like the others. But you take a good look and choose me. A fly will be sitting above my right eye that will be a certain guide for you." And then the fair maiden proceeded to tell him about herself, who she was. "Do you know the priest of such and such a village?" she says. "I'm his daughter, the one who disappeared from home when 9 years old. One day my father was angry with me, and in his wrath he said, 'May devils fly away with you.' I went out on the steps and began to cry. All of a sudden the fiend seized me and brought me here, and here I am living with them." Next morning the old man brought in the 12 fair maidens, one just like another, and ordered the youth to choose his bride. He looked at them and took her above whose right eye sat a fly. The old man was loth to give her up, so he shifted the maidens about and told him to make a fresh choice. The youth pointed out the same one as before. The fiend obliged him to choose yet a 3rd time. He again guessed his bride aright. "Well, you're in luck. Take her home with you," said the fiend. Immediately the youth and the fair maiden found themselves on the shore of the lake, and until they reached the high road they kept on walking backwards. Presently the devils came rushing after them in hot pursuit. "Let us recover our maiden," they cry. They look, there are no footsteps going away from the lake. All the footsteps lead into the water. They ran to and fro. They searched everywhere, but they had to go back empty-handed. Well, the good youth brought his bride to her village and stopped opposite the priest's house. The priest saw him and sent out his labourer, saying, "Go and ask who those people are." We are travellers. Please let us spend the night in your house," they replied. "I have merchants paying me a visit," says the priest, "and even without them there's but little room in the house." "What are you thinking of, father?" says one of the merchants. "It's always one's duty to accommodate a traveller. They won't interfere with us." "Very well, let them come in." So they came in, exchanged greetings, and sat down on a bench in the back corner. "Don't you know me, father?" presently asks the fair maiden. "Of a surety I am your own daughter." Then she told him everything that had happened. They began to kiss and embrace each other, to pour forth tears of joy. "And who is this man?" says the priest. "That is my betrothed. He brought me back into the white world. If it hadn't been for him, I should have remained down there forever." After this, the fair maiden untied her bundle, and in it were gold and silver dishes. She had carried them off from the devils. The merchant looked at them and said, "Ah, those are my dishes. One day I was feasting with my guests, and when I got drunk, I became angry with my wife. 'To the devil with you!' I exclaimed, and began flinging from the table, and beyond the threshold, whatever I could lay my hands upon. At that moment, my dishes disappeared, and in reality so had it happened. When the merchant mentioned the devil's name, the fiend immediately appeared at the threshold, began seizing the gold and silver wares and flinging in their place bits of pottery. Well, by this accident, the youth got himself a capital bride, and after he had married her, he went back to his parents. They had long ago counted him as lost to them forever. And indeed it was no subject for jesting. He had been away from home 3 whole years, and yet it seemed to him that he had not in all spent more than 24 hours with the devils. A quaint version of the legend on which this story is founded is given by Gervase of Tilbury in his Otia Imperialia, whence the story passed into the Gesta Romanorum cap, Clexi, and spread widely over medieval Europe. A certain Catalonian was so much annoyed one day by the continued and inappeasable crying of his little daughter that he commended her to the demons, whereupon she was immediately carried off. 7 years after this, he learnt from a man placed by a similar imprecation in the power of the demons, who used him as a vehicle, that his daughter was in the interior of a neighbouring mountain and might be recovered if he would demand her. So he ascended to the summit of the mountain and there claimed his child. She straightway appeared in miserable plight, arida, tetra, oculis vagis, ossibus et nervis et pellibus vix herentibus, etc. By the judicious care, however, of her now cautious parent, she was restored to physical and moral respectability. For some valuable observations on this story, see Liebrecht's edition of the Otia Imperialia, pp. In the German story of Die 7 Raben, grim, no? A father's hasty word turns his 6 sons into ravens. When devils are introduced into a story of this class, it always assumes a grotesque, if not an absolutely comic air. The evil spirits are almost always duped and defeated, and that result is generally due to their remarkable want of intelligence, for they display in their dealings with their human antagonists a deficiency of intellectual power which almost amounts to imbecility. The explanation of this appears to be that the devils of European folklore have nothing in common with the rebellious angels of Miltonic theology, beyond their vague denomination. Nor can any but a nominal resemblance be traced between their chiefs or grandfathers and the thunder-smitten but still majestic Lucifer, son of the morning. The demon rabble of popular tales are merely the lubber fiends of heathen mythology, beings endowed with supernatural might but scantily provided with mental power, all of terrific manual clutch, but of weak intellectual grasp. And so the hardy mortal who measures his powers against theirs, even in those cases in which his strength has not been intensified by miraculous agencies, easily overcomes or deludes the slow-witted monsters with whom he strives, whether his antagonist be a Celtic or Teutonic giant, or a French ogre, or a Norse troll, or a Greek Drakos, or Lamia, or a Lithuanian Laume, or a Russian snake, or Koshche, or Baba Yaga, or an Indian Rakshasa or Pisacha, or any other member of the many species of fiends for which, in Christian parlance, the generic name is that of devils. There is no great richness of invention manifested in the stories which deal with the outwitting of evil spirits. The same devices are in almost all cases resorted to, and their effect is invariable. The leading characters undergo certain transmutations as the scene of the story is shifted, but their mutual relations remain constant. Thus, in a German story, we find a schoolmaster deceiving the devil in one of its Slavonic counterparts. A gypsy deludes a snake. In another, current among the Baltic Kashubes, in place of the snake figures a giant so huge that the thumb of his glove serves as a shelter for the hero of the tale, one which is closely connected with that which tells of Thor and the giant Skrymir. The Russian stories in which devils are tricked by mortals closely resemble, for the most part, those which are current in so many parts of Europe. The hero of the tale squeezes way out of a piece of cheese or curd, which he passes off as a stone. He induces the fleet demon to compete with his hop-o'-my-thumb. The hare, he sets the strong demon to wrestle with his greybeard. The bear, he frightens the grandfather. Of the fiends, by proposing to fling that potentate's magic staff so high in the air that it will never come down, and he persuades his diabolical opponents to keep pouring gold into a perforated hat or sack. Sometimes, however, a less familiar incident occurs. Thus, in a story from the Tambov government, Zachary the Unlucky is sent by the tailor, his master, to fetch a fiddle from a wolf fiend. The demon agrees to let him have it, on condition that he spends 3 years in continually weaving nets without ever going to sleep. Zachary sets to work, but at the end of a month he grows drowsy. The wolf asks if he is asleep. "No, I'm not asleep," he replies, "but I'm thinking which fish there are most of in the river, big ones or little ones." The wolf offers to go and inquire, and spends 3 or 4 months in solving the problem. Meanwhile, Zachary sleeps, taking care, however, to be up and at work when the wolf returns to say that the big fishes are in the majority. Time passes, and again Zachary begins to nod. The wolf inquires if he has gone to sleep, but is told that he is awake, but engrossed by the question as to which folks are there most of in the world, the living or the dead. The wolf goes out to count them, and Zachary sleeps in comfort till just before he comes back to say that the living are more numerous than the dead. By the time the wolf fiend has made a 3rd journey in order to settle a doubt which Zachary describes as weighing on his mind as to the numerical relation of the large beasts to the small, the 3 years have passed away. So the wolf fiend is obliged to part with his fiddle, and Zachary carries it back to the tailor in triumph. The demons not unfrequently show themselves capable of being actuated by gratitude. Thus, as we have already seen, the story of the awful drunkard represents the devil himself as being grateful to a man who has rebuked an irascible old woman for unjustly blaming the Prince of Darkness. In a skazka from the Orenburg government, a lad named Vanka Jack is set to watch his father's turnip field by night. Presently comes a boy who fills 2 huge sacks with turnips and vainly tries to carry them off. While he is tugging away at them, he catches sight of Vanka and immediately asks him to help him home with his load. Vanka consents and carries the turnips to a cottage wherein is seated an old greybeard with horns on his head, who receives him kindly and offers him a quantity of gold as a recompense for his trouble. But, acting on the instructions he has received from the boy, Vanka will take nothing but the greybeard's lute, the sounds of which exercise a magic power over all living creatures. One of the most interesting of the stories of this class is that of the man who unwittingly blesses the devil. As a specimen of its numerous variants, we may take the opening of a сказка, respecting the origin of brandy. There was a moujik who had a wife and 7 children, and one day he got ready to go afield, to plough. When his horse was harnessed and everything ready, he ran indoors to get some bread. But when he got there and looked in the cupboard, there was nothing there but a single crust. This he carried off bodily and drove away. He reached his field and began ploughing. When he had ploughed up half of it, he unharnessed his horse and turned it out to graze. After that, he was just going to eat the bread, when he said to himself, "Why didn't I leave this crust for my children?" So, after thinking about it for a while, he set it aside. Presently, a little demon came sidling up and carried off the bread. The moujik returned and looked about everywhere, but no bread was to be seen. However, all he said was, "God be with him who took it." The little demon ran off to the devil and cried, "Grandfather, I've stolen Uncle Sidor's bread." Well, what did he say? He said, "God be with him. Be off with you," says the devil. "Hire yourself to him for 3 years. So the little demon ran back to the moujik. The rest of the story tells how the imp taught Isidore to make corn brandy and worked for him a long time faithfully. But at last, one day, Isidore drank so much brandy that he fell into a drunken sleep. From this he was roused by the imp, whereupon he exclaimed in a rage, "Go to the devil!" And straightway the little demon disappeared. In another version of the story, when the peasant finds that his crust has disappeared, he exclaims, "Here's a wonder! I've seen nobody, and yet somebody has carried off my crust. Well, here's good luck to him. I dare say I shall starve to death." When Satan heard what had taken place, he ordered that the peasant's crust should be restored. So the demon who had stolen it turned himself into a good youth and became the peasant's hireling. When a drought was impending, he scattered the peasant's seed corn over a swamp. When a wet season was at hand, he sowed the slopes of the hills. In each instance, his forethought enabled his master to fill his barns while the other peasants lost their crops. A Moravian version of this tale will be found in Der Schwarze Knechts. Wenzig No P. In another Moravian story in the same collection, No, entitled Der böse Geist im Dienste. An evil spirit steals the food which a man had left outside his house for poor passers-by. When the demon returns to hell, he finds its gates closed, and he is informed by the oldest of the devils that he must expiate his crime by a 3 years' service on earth. A striking parallel to the Russian and the former of the Moravian stories is offered by A Legend of Serpent Worship from Baunagar in Kathiawad. A certain king had 7 wives, one of whom was badly treated. Feeling hungry one day, she scraped out of the pots which had been given her to wash some remains of rice boiled in milk, set the food on one side, and then went to bathe. During her absence, a female Naga, or supernatural snake being, ate up the rice, and then entering her hole, sat there, resolved to bite the woman if she should curse her, but not otherwise. When the woman returned, and found her meal had been stolen, she did not lose her temper, but only said, "May the stomach of the eater be cooled." When the Naga heard this, she emerged from her hole and said, "Well done! I now regard you as my daughter," etc. From the Indian Antiquary, Bombay, No. pp.a. Sometimes the demon of the legenda bears a close resemblance to the snake of the сказка. Thus, an evil spirit is described as coming every night at 12 o'clock to the chamber of a certain princess and giving her no rest till the dawn of day. A soldier The fairy prince in a lower form comes to her rescue and awaits the arrival of the fiend in her room, which he has had brilliantly lighted. Exactly at midnight up flies the evil spirit, assumes the form of a man, and tries to enter the room. But he is stopped by the soldier, who persuades him to play cards with him for Phillips, tricks him in various ways, and Phillips him to such effect with a species of three-man beetle that the demon beats a hasty retreat. The next night, Satan sends another devil to the palace. The result is the same as before, and the process is repeated every night for a whole month. At the end of that time, Grandfather Satan himself confronts the soldier, but he receives so tremendous a beating that he flies back howling to his swamp. After a time, the soldier induces the whole of the fiendish party to enter his knapsack, prevents them from getting out again by signing it with a cross, and then has it thumped on an anvil to his heart's content. Afterwards, he carries it about on his back, the fiends remaining under it all the while. But at last some women open it during his absence from a cottage in which he has left it, and out rush the fiends with a crash and a roar. Meeting the soldier on his way back to the cottage, they are so frightened that they fling themselves into the pool below a mill wheel, and there, the story declares, they still remain. This legend is evidently nothing more than an adaptation of one of the tales about the dull demons of olden times, whom the Christian storyteller has transformed into Satan and his subject fiends, by way of a conclusion to this chapter which might be expanded indefinitely. So numerous are the stories of the class of which it treats, we will take the moral tale of the gossip's bedstead. A certain peasant, it relates, was so poor that, in order to save himself from starvation, he took to sorcery. After a time he became an adept in the black art and contracted an intimate acquaintance with the fiendish races. When his son had reached man's estate, the peasant saw it was necessary to find him a bride, so he set out to seek one among his friends, the devils. On arriving in their realm, he soon found what he wanted, in the person of a girl who had drunk herself to death, and who, in common with other women who had died of drink, was employed by the devils as a water carrier. Her employers at once agreed to give her in marriage to the son of their friend, and a wedding feast was instantly prepared. While the consequent revelry was in progress, Satan offered to present to the bridegroom a receipt which a father had given to the devils when he sold them his son. But when the receipt was sought for the production of which would have enabled the bridegroom to claim the youth in question as his slave, it could not be found. A certain devil had carried it off, and refused to say where he had hidden it. In vain did his master cause him to be beaten with iron clubs. He remained obstinately mute. At length Satan exclaimed, "Stretch him on the gossip's bedstead." As soon as the refractory devil heard these words, he was so frightened that he surrendered the receipt, which was handed over to the visitor. Astonished at the result, the peasant inquired what sort of bedstead that was which had been mentioned with so much effect. "Well, I'll tell you." "But don't you tell anyone else," replied Satan, after hesitating for a time. "That bedstead is made for us devils, and for our relations, connections, and gossips. It is all on fire, and it runs on wheels and turns round and round." When the peasant heard this, fear came upon him, and he jumped up from his seat and fled away as fast as he could. At this point, though much still remains to be said, I will for the present bring my remarks to a close. Incomplete as is the account I have given of the Skazkas, it may yet, I trust, be of use to students who wish to compare as many types as possible of the popular tale. I shall be glad if it proves of service to them. I shall be still more glad if I succeed in interesting the general reader in the tales of the Russian people, and through them, in the lives of those Russian men and women of low degree who are wont to tell them, those Russian children who love to hear them,